Okay. Good evening. I would like to welcome you all to ACNE's remote council meeting. We have a very full agenda, so I would like to kindly request that we keep to time. You should by now be familiar with the protocols for remote meetings, so please be mindful of them. Can I remind councillors, officers, and members of the public who are introducing reports, asking questions, responding to questions, or contributing to debate to please turn on your camera when doing so. If you are not directly participating in the meeting, you don't need to have your camera on. Should you wish to speak, please turn on your camera and raise your hand or use the chat function. Please note that the chat function should not be used for any other purpose. Agenda item 1. Apology for absence. I receive apology for absence from Councillor Lynch. Any other apologies for absence or lateness? Councillor Odds?
Yeah, I will need to leave the meeting between approximately 8:25 and 9:15.
That will become a challenge because your motion is going to be towards the meeting.
Yeah, but I will be back at 9:15.
Okay, then, no problem. That'll be fine. So we're happy with that. So it's lateness. So I've got Councillor Boggs for lateness. Oh, comment. Councillor Boggs, have you got comment? Councillor Boggs?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. As regards the use of the camera, I thought I ought to note in advance that my council-issued laptop is capable of camera functions or audio functions, but it's not, alas, capable of both simultaneously without crashing the entire meeting. In which case, I asked for a special dispensation on camera usage, though I am very happy to switch the camera on for a moment, just so that you know I've not been replaced by someone much more capable than the real John Barr.
Okay, that's fine, no problem. Councillor Peters?
Apologies for lateness from Councillor Moema.
Okay, Councillor Moema, apologies for lateness. Are there any other apologies for lateness or absence?
Mr. Speaker, yes, I send my apologies. I will need to leave the meeting early today as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other apologies? Thank you. We're moving on now. Agenda item 2, Speaker's announcement. I am pleased to have raised over £19,000 for my 3 charities, ACNE Sporting Mind, Sister Space, and Ivy Street Family Center and Grow Babies Center since the start of my speakership. I will switch to raising funds for ACNE Food Bank. The food bank has experienced a huge increase in demand since the start of the COVID pandemic, and in the first 3 months of lockdown alone, supporting 5,600 people, which is more than they served throughout 2018. Now more than ever, they need our support, and I hope that you will all show your usual generosity by donating funds in the coming months. I marked Silver Sunday on the 4th of October, and I would like to thank the members that donated cakes for their generosity and the ACNE Caribbean Elderly Organization for helping us to manage the distribution of these freshly baked cakes to elderly people on the day. Diana Abbott, MP, Councillor Williams, the Mayor, and myself raised the flag for Black History Month at the Town Hall on October 1st. I also made a video with Deputy Mayor Bramble for London Democracy Week for ACNE schools. Forthcoming events, including Remembrance Sunday on the 8th of November, and we send out invites in due course. We'll be running the event differently to previous years, and this will be in line with the current pandemic restrictions. I will also ask councillors to join me in congratulating Jim Armstrong of Lebanon Boat Club, who was awarded the British Empire Medal in the Queen's Birthday Honour List. Agenda item 3, declaration of interest. Are there any declaration of interest relating to any item on the agenda? If so, could members please declare it now, indicating which item it relates to and the nature of the interest. Any declaration of interest?
Mr. Speaker, can I declare an interest in transport-related items as the chair of the Transport and Environment Committee at London Councils? It doesn't have my impact on my ability to take part in those items, but I just want it on the record. I haven't yet updated my declaration of interest because I was only elected to that position last week.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other interest, declaration? Thank you. Moving on to next agenda item. Agenda item 4. Minutes of the meetings held 22nd of July 2020. I have received a minor correction in advance of the meeting on page 33, paragraph 14.14. The Lama review should read the Lamy review. Any other minor grammatical changes that have been spotted, please email governance services, and those will be amended on the final version. Can we agree the minutes of the previous meeting of council held on Wednesday, 22nd July 2020?
Mr. Speaker,
Agreed.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Councillor Stamberger.
Yeah, I got the minutes, which is 38 pages. I don't find it necessary that 38 pages for me to have to look through every meeting is not acceptable.
Okay, Councillor Stamberger, that's fine. That's fine, it's noted. So can we move on now? Thank you. Minute is agreed, so we're moving on now. Thank you. Agenda item 5. We will now move to agenda item 5, deputation. Councillor Radbourne, please introduce the deputation and the spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just going to very quickly introduce this deputation, which is about the proposed closure of Brook Road sorting office by Royal Mail. And Susan Downing, a resident, is going to speak. I just wanted to congratulate her and Bella Pieck for the petition that they raised on change.org, which is now nearing 3,000. And also thanks to Mayor Glanville for supporting the campaign against the closure, and to all the councillors of the 3 wards affected, which is Lea Bridge, Hackney and Cazenove, particularly thanks to Councillor Desmond. So I'll hand over to Susan, if you don't mind now, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, I would like to invite Ms. Susan Downing to speak. You will have up to 5 minutes to speak. So it's Susan Downing, please. You have 5 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm speaking this evening on behalf of the local initiative petitioning against imminent closure of Brook Road Royal Mail's collection office. With the closure of Brook Road office, local residents will be expected to travel to the Leighton office to collect their parcels and make parcel inquiries. This is an utterly ridiculous journey prospect. Leighton is not an easy place to get to from Hackney. From our local area, it's a 1 hour round trip outside of peak times for those with a car. For bus users, between 90 minutes and 2 hours round trip. Some people will require 2 buses each way. Not to mention the burden of travel costs. To give a sense of distance, according to Google, walking from Brook Road office to the Leighton collection office takes an hour. Bus services are dwindling, there is less seat availability due to distancing measures, and access roads between Clapton and Leighton are already clogged with barely moving traffic due to road access restrictions. We are repeatedly advised to travel for essential reasons only, to drive less to cut pollution, and expected to stay local. Brook Road provides a convenient and easy access service in the heart of our community, yet we will be expected to make lengthy and out-of-the-way journeys for parcel or an inquiry. Many residents in our local community will struggle after this closure. Think of the elderly, disabled, people with transport challenges, health issues, those who are pregnant or have a baby, parents with small children in tow, people with busy work schedules, including key workers. They will not be able and should not be expected to traipse all the way to Leighton and back. They all rely on local services. Collecting a package from Brook Road can be achieved while dropping the kids off at nursery or popping out for a few groceries. It's got a large indoor waiting area and wide street level entrance which shelters residents from bad weather, allows for social distancing and accommodates all disabilities, including enough space for wheelchairs and mobility scooters. Leighton office, journey and queuing facilities can offer this. Collecting from Leighton will be out of the reach of many and very time consuming and stressful for everybody else. Leighton office is simply too far away from our area to be a collection point replacement for Brook Road office. Royal Mail suggests that in future we make redelivery arrangements via their website. This is already an option, but does not and will not work for many people. It's not always a suitable solution. There is no alternative to an office visit for missing parcel inquiries. To add even more difficulties, the proposed closure date of mid-November could not come at a worse time. We're all heading for increased lockdown restrictions on movement. With winter approaching, residents, including the elderly and vulnerable, will be expected to wait around for buses they would not be otherwise taking, with yet more time outdoors in lengthening queues at Leighton office. With the inevitability that many families and friendship groups will be separated this Christmas and seasonal shopping online increasing, there will be a huge upsurge in Royal Mail parcel delivery in the run-up to Christmas. Royal Mail has already today reported in The Guardian a vast increase in parcel volume from online shopping since lockdowns began, yet they intend to remove a local service that ensures these packages can be accessed by local recipients. Consider also the knock-on effect of pressure on overstretched local services and amenities, increased traffic chaos, increased demand for buses. Envisage a Saturday morning rush hour just for parcel collections. Royal Mail offers the option of having a parcel redelivered to a local post office for collection, but local post offices with ever-shrinking service space are already struggling under the growing volume of counter customers and return parcels. The staff at Brook Road know lots of local residents on site, myself included. They hand over.
We have a minute left.
And resolve queries efficiently with familiarity. In these times of minimal human contact, it's good to be reminded that we're all part of a community. Many people already lonely and isolated by lockdown and life events will be left feeling that yet one more connection to the outside world has been lost. We need local services now more than ever. To end on a personal note, my mother is 82. She has no computer skills or internet access. She now lives alone. She's lonely and isolated. I've been wanting to send her parcels to cheer her up, but my mother has asked me not to send packages in case she misses the postman. Her local office has closed down. Parcels would go to an office too far away. She cannot contemplate a multi-bus journey there and back. There are many, many residents in our community for whom this will be their future too if we lose Brook Road office. It's a vital piece of the local community infrastructure. It's well used, much valued, and we need it to continue being a community service. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Do members have any question for the deputation?
Yes.
Members you have up to 5 minutes in total, all questions. So I've got Councillor Desmond that wants to speak.
Good evening, Mr.
Councillor
Speaker.
Stamberger, yeah. Go on, Councillor. Go on.
Good evening, Mr. Speaker, and good evening, Sue and others in the deputation. Congratulations on the fantastic petition, which I thought was brilliantly put together and very speedily put together. What I wanted to ask you, Sue, it's certainly in the community interest for this facility to remain open. But would you not think it's also in the Royal Mail's interest? Whenever I go there, it's extremely popular with visitors. Increasingly, people are sending parcels because of various issues, particularly the pandemic and online sales and marketing. And for them to think about closing such a facility, I would have thought would be commercial suicide when they have so many competitors. So I would ask you whether we can't just make a commercial point that it's in their interest, as well as allowing a wonderful community facility to continue.
Thank you, Michael. I couldn't agree with you more. That we haven't included that in the petition in information, and I didn't include that this evening because Royal Mail has taken the decision to close the office. I figured they've already made their commercial decision. But you're absolutely right. With the increase in parcels and the fact that Royal Mail, I say just today, has announced a massive percentage increase of Royal Mail parcel movement because of the increase in online shopping, which is only going to increase. But also regarding their competition in the local area from courier competitors. Courier competitors work through local corner shops and newsagents. In the local area that Brook Road services, most of the courier companies have lost their positions with the local shops because the shops have either shut down or they've axed their own contract with the couriers. So Royal Mail is in the strongest position it's been in for years to grab a bigger slice of a local market. And yes, we could point it out to them. Perhaps that will turn their head.
Councillor Sternberger.
Thank you. I have 3 points. The first point is a general question, and this is not for, it's more for the council than for...
Don't forget, you've only got 1 minute to say that.
Okay, my first point is basically, realistically, how strong are we that if we do take this on, that we can see some kind of a result and hopefully keep the post office open? The second point is that if there's going to be any talking or anything from our side, from the Conservative Party side, we'd also very much want to be involved because we think it's very important. And my third point is, bearing in mind with all these new shenanigans on the road, when you were saying it takes about 1 hour, did you take in consideration now the horrendous traffic that's going on, or is this including the new shenanigan?
No, sorry.
Oh, go on.
To answer your first and last questions, I won't answer the central one, but the first and last questions, if I may. The last question, I actually checked with Google today as to the expected journey times. So I would imagine at this point being live, it would factor it in. But you're absolutely right. You could add more time onto that very easily at certain times of day. And to answer the first question is that I believe there is enough strength of feeling and voice in the local community. Our petition of 3,000 has been literally by word of mouth. We haven't even had a external platform in the public arena to get more signatures. This has just literally been one neighbour, one person on social media saying to another, you live in Hackney, you live in Clapton, do you want to sign this? It's been totally word of mouth. We got 2,000 signatures in the first 3 days. So I believe there's a lot of mileage in this. Also, many, many people of 3,000 who've signed have written individual letters to the CEO of Royal Mail, individual letters with their own story in. So I think there's a lot of mileage. We can have help with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor God.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you,
1 minute, yes. You have 1 minute.
A fantastic petition and a fantastic introduction. Very briefly, you outlined very much the disproportionate impact this is going to have on certain sections of the community. I'm not sure you in Leabridge Ward, which I represent together with my colleagues, Councillor Rathbone and August Canley, we had a terrible fire in the Latham's Yard, where a number of residents have been having to use Brook Road for all their posts over the last year. You know, they are going to be a section of the community that's impacted. And also, I think that there's going to be a disproportionate impact on parts of the community who live in different types of housing, because people who live in flats, it's much more difficult for them to get post delivered than people who live in street properties. You know, so I think this is going to maybe impact people in different types of housing, different impacts, you know, different incomes, as well as people with disabilities.
Councillor Gordon, please go to your first point, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just really asking for Susan whether she could comment on that.
Yeah. Absolutely, thanks very much, Margaret. You're absolutely right, and I couldn't cover every single group of people. I covered the ones who, as many as I could. But you're absolutely right about Latham's Yard. I actually live on the same estate, so I'm aware of that fire, and I've been reading the many comments that people have written on the petition page after signing. I read them all today, and everyone has a personal story, and all of the residents from Latham Yard have signed, and each one has written and said how crucial Brook Road is for them, because that's now become their only way of getting their packages.
Thank you. I will now invite Mayor Glanville to respond to the deputation. You will have up to 5 minutes to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Susan, and all the other residents that have been part of this campaign. I just echo the point you made about word of mouth. The first I heard about this campaign wasn't through a formal consultation from Royal Mail or a stakeholder email from their comms team. It was residents contacting me, I think after midnight at the very start of October, going, did I know about this? And would offer their support to the campaign. So that point about that petition spreading by word of mouth, I think, is just so true. And it's a huge testament, I think, to those in E5 and Clapton that it's reached 3,000, and hopefully after tonight, or almost 3,000, hopefully after tonight it will go even further, and that people have taken those steps to write to the Chief Executive. Within 24 hours, not only did I sign that petition, but on behalf of the Council wrote formally to the Chief Exec of Royal Mail. And I agree with you, Ms Downing, in the strongest possible terms, everything that you've said about why this sorting office is at the heart of the community. I would dare to say it's a bit of an E5 icon, the place that people come, they meet, it's really embedded in the local community, and it's accessible. And I think as much as we love our neighbours in Waltham Forest, not many of us use Waltham Forest facilities on a day-to-day basis. So it isn't even like coming into Hackney Central, where you'd be doing something else alongside picking up a parcel. It's counter to most of the journeys that people take. And I think, as you've said, it would be ill-judged and counterproductive at the best of times. But where we are at the moment, where people are increasingly reliant on alternative means of communication, like letters, receiving parcels, not going out to the shops, as you described, it's a really important part of what residents need in that community. It will also be serving a myriad of small and micro businesses who are just keeping going by having a local sorting office in their community. And all of them to be expected to go to Leighton, I just think is completely unacceptable. We've talked about transport. We don't even have the 48 bus anymore that we fought very hard to keep, and we all know that buses are often full. I've made all of these arguments to Royal Mail, as well as the equality challenges and the nature of the community in E5. And I pick up what Councillor Gordon said. Lots of people living in flats, never mind some of the crises that they faced in usual times. And I fully recognise the description, Ms Downing, of your mum. That's exactly the type of thing that my mum would go through if faced with a challenge like this and being faced with taking several bus journeys. And it's just simply unacceptable. I regret to say that we haven't had a reply to my letter. I've chased that letter with the Chief Executive of Royal Mail today. I really hope that they respond, that they listen. I'm really concerned, as you've said, about the staff that work there as well. And I know how friendly and part of the community that they are. And I know that there's broader trade union work happening to see what else we can do around the campaign. And I just hope that they do start to listen. We've got a brief extension to November, and I think the minimum we can expect is moving these changes beyond the immediate crisis and allowing a proper engagement exercise to continue. I'd finish on, many of us on this call support this campaign. I think all of us as councillors are united and with you. We have a bit of a track record of fighting to save post offices, me personally and professionally in Tottenham and Hackney. So I just really hope that we can win this one too. I'm afraid that unlike with Murray Grove, where Mayor Pipe and Hoxton councillors and the council stepped in, the council itself can't run this sorting office and fund it. We really do need the Post Office and Royal Mail to listen to reason, and also that commercial incentive. And one of the arguments we made at that time was that we have a population that is growing here in Hackney. We have a population in terms of our businesses that is growing. These are counter-commercial threats to networks that support and sustain our businesses, and those businesses then support this network. That was the argument we once made at Murray Grove to Royal Mail, and we were right. The Post Office, the council opened there, which also served parcel collection, has actually increased its custom. So far from being a kind of race to the bottom and a diminution of service, actually, if you invest in it, more people use it, as you set out, Ms. Downing. I really hope, as I say, that they will listen. We're with you all of the way, and just thank you for coming tonight and making the case so powerfully as you have.
Thank you. I would like to thank Ms. Susan Downing for attending this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now move to agenda item 6, question from the members of the public. I would like to welcome members of the public who have submitted questions and are present this evening. A maximum of 30 minutes has been allocated for questions from members of the public. We have received 3 questions, which will be taken in the order in which they were received. Good evening, Jean-Marie Richards. Are you present? Ms. Richards, are you present? Right, I'm moving on to the next one. Yeah. Yes, the question will be replied in writing. So thank you. Moving on to the next question. Good evening, Susan Rausuli. Are you present? Susan Rausuli?
Yes, she's there.
Can you unmute yourself, please?
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me.
Yes, please ask your question, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me and enabling me to ask my question. My question is about Hackney pension funds. Hackney is one of few local authorities which has direct investment in some companies which are on the UN list of companies which are complicit in illegal settlements in Israel. Some of these companies, well, the United Nations Human Rights Council has very strong opinions about these companies and their continuing presence in illegally occupied Palestine. These settlements are a block to achieving any kind of peace, and also basically their activities are illegal. They are directly affecting the human rights of Palestinians. 2 very simple examples is Elbit and Caterpillar. Caterpillar is a US company that all the churches in England have divested from. They manufacture the bulldozers that are used in demolishing homes, villages, schools, water pipes. They basically make way for illegal settlements, and they will destroy Palestinian lives. So Caterpillar is number 1, particularly bad investment, and the other one is Elbit, and Elbit is an arms manufacturer. It is famous for the
Excuse me, can you get to your question, please?
Okay, my question is, how does Hackney Council justify investing in such companies when Hackney Council has an ethical investment policy?
Councillor Chapman, please, will you reply? You have up to 5 minutes to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Rasuli, for your question. In taking investment decisions, the Pensions Committee's primary duty is a fiduciary one. That's to ensure that the fund is able to pay pension benefits to its members when they become due. Investment decisions have to be made on financial grounds. We do not make investment decisions on political or moral grounds alone, and we have regard to the Law Commission guidance on this matter. I must say we don't have direct investments as such. The pensions fund's assets are managed by external managers with oversight from the Council Pensions Committee. The investments you refer to are a small part of a very large collective investment fund. The transition costs that the fund would be exposed to in moving such particular investments would be significant. However, I will say that we are an active member of the National Local Authority Pension Fund Forum, which LAF, which acts collectively using the weight of its 82 members' funds and which amount to £300 billion in assets. It exists to champion responsible investment through robust engagement with the companies that we own. Now, the United Nations has cited a total of 112 companies in the database of business enterprises involved in certain specified activities related to the Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory. LAP has now begun to engage with companies cited by the UN regarding these activities. The Hackney Fund will continue to support LAP in its direct engagement with these companies. I can assure you that the committee continues to monitor legislation, court decisions and other developments with regard to this subject, and will keep its approach under review. But we will not commit to any form of divestment that will, we believe, might lead to a financial detriment to the fund and potentially breach the Law Commission's guidance. The committee is currently reviewing the fund's investment strategy, and as part of this exercise, we'll be giving further consideration to the fund's responsible investment approach and policy, including in respect of human rights issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Ms. Rasuli, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I thank Councillor Chapman.
You have a minute to say a minute to ask your supplementary question, please.
Okay, absolutely. I thank Councillor Chapman for his response, and I'm very pleased to hear that as part of LAP you are engaging with these companies. Just this very small point to make, the issue of fiduciary responsibility. I was also part of the fossil-free divestment, and the issue of fiduciary responsibility was discussed there. But basically, investments that are ethically unsound, they would also be financially unsound, because there will be future movements but basically they are unsound investments. If something is illegal, therefore it is not a sound investment. It's not a good place for our money to be invested. But I thank you for your response. Thank you.
Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
You have 2 minutes to reply. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Rasuli, and we take your point. Can I just say with respect to the fossil fuel investment, there's a very clear...
Councillor Chapman, please, there's point of order from Councillor Odds. Yes, Councillor Odds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it in order that the questioner did not identify herself as the Secretary of the Hackney branch of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, an organisation that actively supports boycott, divestment and sanctions, which goes contrary to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which the Council passed some months ago?
Thank you, Councillor Odds. I don't think the point is relevant because she's living in Hackney. So, Councillor Chapman, please, can you reply? You've got 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just say, with our decision on fossil fuels, there's a very clear financial argument that investment in fossil fuels results in us ending up holding stranded assets, which will undermine the value of the fund. And it's actually been demonstrated by a big drop in the valuations of some of the big oil companies since we started our carbon policy. I think the issue in respect to the human rights issues of some of the big oil companies since we started our carbon policy. I think the issue in respect to the human rights issues in Israel is more complicated, but that doesn't mean we are obviously through LAP working very hard.
So Facils, are you present? Please ask your question if you're present.
Given everything else that's going on in the world, I was surprised to get 2 questions on pensions to the council tonight. But having said that, I'm always very happy to talk about the excellent work of the members of the committee and the great support that we get from our officers and advisors on these things. So thanks for your question. The pension fund has recently completed its triennial evaluation, which sets employer contribution rates for the 3 financial years starting 2021. As part of this exercise, the committee looked at the funding level over the longer term. In doing this, we take many factors into account, including market and economic issues likely to affect returns on investments, as well as inflationary pressures and the maturity of our membership. The Pensions Committee then agreed the funding strategy, which it believes, after taking account of significant modelling, will result in a 100% funding level in the future. At the time these were approved, the likely impact of COVID-19 was beginning to feed through markets, and of course the national lockdown had only just been implemented. Hackney's pension fund, like everybody else, faces considerable financial uncertainty, including from future interest rates, but also factors affecting the international economy, for example, the long-term impact of COVID-19 and Brexit. However, a wide range of both positive and negative possible scenarios are considered in the model of our funding strategy. Advice from the fund's actuary is that the agreed strategy is still relevant and that we should not make any knee-jerk decisions regarding temporary volatility. This is particularly pertinent given the very long-term nature of the pension fund's liability profile and its investment horizon. We will not be taking any specific decisions relating to interest rates in isolation, although their likely trend will to some extent influence the current development of the fund's investment strategy. This is in itself under review in the usual manner following the completion of the actuarial report to ensure that our broad investment choices are relevant and in line with the funding strategy. I should add that the current financial position of the fund remains sound. Its cash flow position is positive and the investment position has improved from the lows seen earlier in the year. Our last reported funding level stood at 88%, and while below the high reported at the time of the actual valuation in March at 92%, this is still well above the 77.6% reported in June last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Mr. Seal, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes. What worries me
you
is
have 1 minute to do
that
so. 1 minute to do so.
interest rates are like. Yes. What worries me is that interest rates are going to rise because of COVID-19, and yes. What worries me
you
is
have 1 minute
that
to do so. 1 minute to do so.
interest rates are like. Yes. What worries me is that interest rates are going to rise because of COVID-19, and
if you know that interest rates are going to rise, I think you're in possession of better information than any of our officers or advisors. I don't think anyone could say with certainty what's going to happen in the future. Admittedly, they're very low at the moment, but there's even some hints from
with partners and considering the needs in the round, joining up and pooling different programs of work and commitments. For example, currently we have commitments to become dementia, learning disability and autism friendly, and eventually age friendly through this. And this has become particularly evident as crucial in addressing the digital divide as we've come to see through this pandemic. And the fifth enabler, which is ensuring the continued involvement of older people. This strategy has been co-designed and produced by older people, and they will play an integral role in oversight, reviewing and governance of the strategy itself. Although the strategy is primarily council focused, it does aim to also influence change through our strategic partnerships and local organisations. In terms of proactively supporting older people, the strategy focuses on a range of different areas relating to opportunity and accessibility. So there are 7 strategic priorities, and they are health and wellbeing, social and civic participation and respect, housing, public spaces and transport, employment and skills, safeguarding safety and security, and Hackney as an employer and support to our older workforce. This strategy aims to help eliminate or mitigate the key inequalities for older people, including in housing conditions, health, work opportunities, personal wellbeing and safety, and social inclusion in the borough. It aims to overcome the barriers and challenges for older people remaining a valued part of our community. This strategy also ultimately seeks to shift some of the negative cultural attitudes that society holds of older people and pushes for greater respect, accessibility and inclusion. Councillor Gordon, your question mentions the pandemic and resulting opportunities for increased social and intergenerational activities. Although the strategy was in development prior to COVID, we know that this pandemic has led to increased social isolation and loneliness for many older people, that older people are most likely to be digitally excluded, and that there have been increasing vulnerabilities around health, nutrition, wellbeing, and exploitation to scams. The strategy aims to provide, build on and facilitate opportunities for greater intergenerational activity, social participation, civic inclusion and localised support through partnership working. There are a few examples I want to just highlight from the strategy, such as building digital skills through digital buddy schemes with older people and younger people, reviewing our suite of public realm furniture, so for example benches, more benches for older people to sit and rest, supporting and promoting volunteering, working with businesses to create more age-friendly high streets, importantly involving older people to co-produce the solutions, and creating intergenerational programmes through work with Young Hackney, Hackney Youth Parliament, Hackney Young Futures Commission and schools and children's centres. It has already informed our humanitarian response, including our work, for example, on befriending support. It has been informed already by what we have learned, so when it is finalised, it will be fit for purpose as we go through the come out of the pandemic and the community response during the pandemic and the lessons learned. We must also remember, though, that during the pandemic, many older people have been working, they've been volunteering, and they've been supporting their communities and have themselves been part of the community response to the crisis. The transformational element of the HMR strategy will be realised through these increased working relationships, training of frontline staff, more connected intergenerational communities, and co-production, which sits at the heart of all this. The strategy also has the ambition to become a member of the World Health Organization's global network.
You've got 1 minute left, please. 1 minute left.
This will provide a platform for external audit, but also learning and sharing of best practice from other committed areas. Ultimately, we recognise that an age-friendly place can only be created and maintained if everyone considers this their business, and the strategy aims to create that cultural shift within the council and also across the borough. And just to note that the consultation is still ongoing to the 30th of October, so I'd encourage people to share that with their networks. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Councillor Gordon, do you have a supplementary question?
No, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been answered very comprehensively.
Thank you. Councillor Patrick, please ask your question.
As set out, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Mayor Bramble, will you please respond? You have up to and not exceeding 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Councillor Patrick, for your question. And you're right about the inequalities, but I would argue, and I'm sure you will agree, that the pandemic exacerbated the inequalities across all walks of life within our society, not just education. And myself, the Mayor, Councillor Gordon and Councillor Woodley, when we spoke to young people and through the Young Futures, one of the things that they talked to us was about the digital divide. So young people are mindful about this too, Councillor Patrick. One of the things that happened is that the government did introduce a scheme, but they took really long to put this in place, Mr. Speaker, and myself and the Mayor did write to the government on occasion about education and highlight this. So unfortunately, that took a time to come into effect. But as soon as that came into effect, we worked tirelessly, officers and with the DfE, to ensure that we could roll out that programme of getting those devices to our children and young people. Now, the government's eligibility was disadvantaged year 10 pupils taking their GCSEs next year, Mr. Speaker, and care leavers and children with a social worker aged 0 to 19. And once that was in place, the Mayor and I went and helped to distribute those laptops for the children in our schools. But unfortunately, while we welcomed that, and Hackney received 1,580 laptops and 297 dongles, Mr. Speaker, it really didn't go far enough in terms of the young people that had a need. And you know, we can talk about the devastation, and we are so sad for all of those that have lost their lives and are unwell. But I really have to say that through this pandemic, we have seen the outpouring of Hackney Heart, and that's what inspired me really to launch the campaign about the digital divide, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank all the businesses and residents that have donated laptops and donated money to be able to distribute more laptops to those schools. And I feel quite confident to speak on behalf of the Mayor, because he will take great pleasure in that as well as we distribute that. And I'm sure he will join me as we distribute now those laptops that now we have the money for and have been donated to us to go out to schools. Also, the virtual school has been working as a team to ensure that children in our care have laptops. Again, Mr. Speaker, I say I welcome what the government did, but it didn't go far enough. So as a council, we bought more laptops to be able to distribute to homes. Not every child has a device, but we ensured that every home where there is a young person has a device and access to a device, because we understand the importance of that, Mr. Speaker. It's with the digital divide, I think that we will continue to work with schools to ensure that we continue to audit and making sure that we get the laptops to the children that need it. Some schools, Mr. Speaker, actually lent out their own devices. Other schools raise money for devices as well. So schools are being quite innovative. Like us, they didn't hang around, Mr. Speaker, for the inaction or slow action of government, and were quite proactive in that. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to say, though, while I say again, I welcome the government doing this, what I would welcome even more, and I know the Mayor feels quite strongly about this, is a holistic approach to addressing the digital divide, not just for children, but thinking about our young people. And I want to thank our colleagues that work with me across the council, because we're not just looking at schools, we are looking at household and how we address the digital divide across the borough, Mr. Speaker.
Got a minute left, please.
Ministers need to think about education as a whole. There's been no revise to the curriculum, Mr. Speaker. It missed 6 months of learning. Government have given young people 3 extra weeks opposed to 6 months out of school, Mr. Speaker. It does not add up. So I think the government needs to do more to think about a holistic approach. Teachers need to be trained to work remotely, Mr. Speaker, and the infrastructure of internet Wi-Fi needs to be looked at to ensure that through the pandemic, children and young people's learning isn't as interrupted. But we in Hackney are doing all we can, and thank you, Hackney Heart, for your generosity in helping us with our campaign. Thank you, Councillor Patrick, for your question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. Councillor Patrick, do you have a supplementary question?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. But sorry, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank Deputy Mayor Bramble for her reply. I think it was very comprehensive and covered everything that I could have asked for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Garcia, please ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, as set out.
Councillor Kennedy, will you please respond? You have up to and not exceeding 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This question is not the first time during this pandemic that the words failure and government have appeared in the same sentence. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, it will not be the last time in my answer either. With regards to testing, the Council is responsible for facilitating the setup of mobile testing units and local testing stations. We do this working in partnership with the Department of Health and Social Care and their main contractors, who in London are Deloitte and Serco. Since the 1st of May, Mr. Speaker, when testing in Hackney started, the availability of testing here has increased from 2 days a week to 17 days a week, now at 4 different locations across the borough. And we have the capacity to carry out over 4,000 tests a week here in Hackney. Despite this, Stamford Hill is an area which is still underserved by testing capacity. We've struggled to find somewhere here where testing can happen 7 days a week, and unfortunately have had to settle on erecting a new local testing station on a housing estate in Sandford Court. This testing station was due to be fully active from this Sunday, the 25th of October, but I'm afraid I've learnt today, Mr. Speaker, that delays on the Deloitte side of the operation there will no longer mean that that is possible. Unfortunately, this sort of last-minute delay and in some cases ineptitude on the government side of things is not unusual. With regard to the issue of applicants being unable to get a test appointment or being sent long distances for tests, as is quite rightly raised by Councillor Garcia in her question, this was most prevalent in the first 2 to 3 weeks of September. The DHSC restricted and rationed the release of testing appointments because there was a huge increase in demand. What might have prompted this, Mr. Speaker? You had people being urged to return to work, you had children returning to school, you had students starting university, all at about the same time, and yet the boss of the government's test and trace programme claimed that such an increase could not have been predicted. That is the calibre of leadership at the top of the government's response in this pandemic. I'll move on to contact tracing. After months of it being pointed out to them that local public health teams do contact tracing as part of their day job, the government did finally consent to contact tracing pilots taking place across 90 local authorities. And so since the 22nd of September, we've been operating a local contact tracing service. We've trained up staff in our call centre, and they make calls to positive testing individuals who haven't been able to be reached by the national system in the first 48 hours of the national system trying to call them. In our first few weeks of operation here in Hackney, we reached 140 individuals. So we reduced the number of missed calls across people who tested positive in Hackney by 40%. We identified their contacts. We helped halt those chains of infection. But in Hackney, we go beyond the demands of the pilot. We also make welfare calls to the positive cases who had already been contacted by the national system. This is just to check that they're okay, that they have access to all the advice and guidance they need, and that they are properly self-isolating. The Mayor and I were lucky enough to meet with some of these call handlers about a fortnight ago. The report that came back, Mr. Speaker, from their calls to residents was that residents really appreciated receiving calls from local people who know Hackney and people who quite simply start their calls by asking them how they are.
A minute left.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, I learned that that appreciation I've just told you about has been recently dimmed, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, by frustration at the length of time people are having to wait for test results to come back from the national system. And secondly, in the light of the decision to allow the police to access NHS test and trace records by suspicion. Suspicion that people now have that sharing details of themselves and their contacts could result in getting in trouble with the law. So, once again, great work being done at a local level, but it's undone by 2 more government failures. I might say, Mr. Speaker, I would add them to my long list, but I have run out of room on my spreadsheet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kennedy. Councillor Garcia, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Councillor Kennedy. No, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Porter, please ask your question.
As set out, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, will you please respond? You have up to and not exceeding 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Councillor Potter, for your question. The coronavirus pandemic has triggered a deep and sudden recession, and the government has made the choice to end the coronavirus job retention scheme at the end of this month, meaning that 44,100 furloughed workers in Hackney face a winter of uncertainty as we enter a second wave of coronavirus and a deeper economic crisis. Their plans mean that the businesses are faced with tough decisions. While the new job support scheme will go some way to help, businesses remain responsible for covering pensions and national insurance costs, making it more cost effective to keep on 1 full-time member of staff rather than keep on 2 part-time members of staff. I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, that their plans mean that some businesses will be unable to weather the economic storm, and some sectors are unlikely to return to pre-crisis employment levels. Hackney Works has been prepared. The council's own job brokerage service, Hackney Works, has been preparing for this by putting support services in place to help residents at a time that they will undoubtedly be worried about their future. Hackney has a track record delivering high quality employment support and employment pathways, providing tailored individual support information, advice and guidance and employment support via our Hackney Works team. providing work placements and apprenticeships while offering stepping stones onto high quality employment, both for young people and over 25s. Employment skills and adult learning was reorganised under lockdown to better target and deliver services to residents looking for employment. This has included residents who lost their jobs during lockdown and residents in the final year of college and sixth form and those at university who are not planning to return to education. During this period, the council's adult learning team, previously located within Hackney Learning Trust, now the Hackney Education, was integrated with the wider Employment and Skills Service. At the start of lockdown, the Hackney Works team, previously arranged by geographical areas, was split into 3 priority areas to focus on the key areas of information, advice and information, advice and guidance, employment support and job brokerage. The IAG supports young residents with benefits, better off work calculations, budgeting support and signposting them to relevant service provisions. The Employability Service helps residents with job search, applying for jobs and preparing for interviews, and the job brokerage team matches and submits residents to job opportunities with a focus on supporting recruitment to council and wider public sector roles. During COVID-19, the council has committed to continuing to develop key employment pathway programmes on a business as usual basis as far as possible during lockdown. These programmes provide vital stepping stones into the labour market for key disadvantaged groups, while widely keeping them up and running was important for the well-being and future prospect of young people and other vulnerable groups. This summer, the council ran a recruitment campaign for 50 apprentices to work for the council, and it was highly successful and very competitive with over 1,000 applications. We continue to develop the Hackney Apprenticeship Network, working with businesses across the borough to provide support and develop high-quality apprenticeship opportunities. We continue to our supported internship programme for young people with a range of learning disabilities. And as with the supported internship programme, we also ran an adult traineeship programme for over 25-year-olds.
Got a minute left. A minute left, please.
Learning programme and work placements. And the council has continued to work with businesses to maintain current work placement opportunities and develop future ones, including the virtual work placements in Shadowing and Hackney 100. To coincide with the end of the coronavirus job retention scheme, the council will be developing an ambitious programme of high quality support work placements for 16 to 24-year-olds across the public and private sector and third sector, starting in early in 2021. And we aim to create 150 placements, building on the success of our previous support employment support programmes. And in line with our aspirations in rebuilding better Hackney,
thank you.
Key focus will be on the council's Kickstart programme, and will be developing skills of young people in important emerging economic sectors such as green jobs.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Radbo, Councillor Porter, do you have a supplementary question?
I did imply in my question, but given we need, I think it's important to allow as many member questions to be heard. I will speak to the Cabinet Member for Planning, Culture and Inclusive Economy in an email format. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Councillor Radbourne, please ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to withdraw the question, as it has in fact been answered by Mayor Glanville earlier on when we had the deputation.
Thank you, Councillor Radbourne. That's very helpful. Councillor Billington, please ask your question.
As set out, Mr. Speaker.
Councillor Woodley, will you please respond? You have up to not exceeding 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Councillor Billington. From the outset, we've been very concerned about the direct and indirect impacts of the virus on household incomes, especially more vulnerable households with multi-generational families. The scope of our support has always gone way beyond the group who are clinically extremely vulnerable, such as those who may be shielding. We took action early to set up a volunteering hub, and help build connections between mutual aid groups and formal community organisations. And I know you did a lot of work on this, Councillor Billington, thank you. By bringing organisations together through the Hackney Food Justice Alliance, we were able to ensure that there was a consistent level of support in communities. The dedicated work of volunteers and of community organisers and centres has been incredibly inspiring. We also set up a single point of contact phone line, and for 4 months at the height of the lockdown, we delivered over 22,000 food parcels. We estimate a further 200,000 meals and food parcels were distributed by the community effort. As we know that food insecurity and food poverty will unfortunately continue, we have worked with a diverse range of community organisations to develop the Community Partnerships Network, which has been up and running since August. And by drawing on the resources and expertise in the voluntary and community sector, we're able to develop a longer term, more inclusive and culturally responsive offer in communities. Whilst organisations draw extensively on their own volunteers and networks and external funding, we've also supported organisations with council grant funding and emergency government funding and directed external support and investment to these groups. This has enabled us to ensure that support for residents continues within the community and gives us a level of preparedness to support residents through the next phase of the pandemic. By connecting the Community Partnerships Network to wider support such as advice providers and health navigators, we are seeking to build local systems of support in the community to tackle poverty. And if I may, I'd like to actually thank all members for the work they've done to contribute to this effort, and also for joining in recent fundraising activity for advice providers in the borough. The medium-term ambition is that this system remains in place beyond the pandemic. Alongside this help with food, to date, around 20,000 families and single people on low incomes have received a further rebate of up to £150 on their council tax bill through the government scheme. And the council has invested an additional £500,000 into its discretionary crisis support scheme, which residents with emergency needs can apply to for urgent financial support. In June, the Child Poverty Action Group recognised Hackney Council's action here as best practice. Since then, a further £120,000 has been invested to support discretionary housing payments for those needing help to pay rent. We've also set up a £100,000 fund to support local residents unable to access the welfare system due to their immigration status and the no recourse to public funds classification. And as a point of interest, so far 30% of people claiming this are women with dependents and 12% are men with dependents. In addition to all of this, we have a special focus on children and families. We've set up an early help hub staffed by young Hackney workers so that households who contact the council's phone line and have children can get wider help if they need it. We tackled holiday hunger by providing activity with food in the Young Hackney provision through school holidays and are now continuing to offer this, and also diverting external funding for food into other community provision. We successfully campaigned for free school meals along with Marcus Rashford to continue to be offered when schools were closed, including school holidays. Ridley Road has been open throughout the pandemic as a much valued source of affordable fresh food, and we partner with charity Alexandra Rose to give out vouchers through children's centres for use in the markets. I'll stop there in case you have any supplementary questions, Councillor Billington.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley. Councillor Billington, do you have a supplementary question?
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker and Councillor Woodley. I'll follow up by email for some specifics in relation to criteria for access to Hackney Food Bank and also the support that the council can give to other mutual aid groups and food providers in our ward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Billington. Councillor Etty, please ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll set out, please.
Councillor Williams, will you please respond? You have up to and not exceeding 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Councillor Etty, for your question. In July, members supported the Black Lives Matter motion passed by yourself and proposed by yourself and seconded by Councillor Fajana Thomas. Well, I say that the council, that members did, but only some members, at least the Labour members, supported that motion. This motion builds on the anti-Semitism motion and the Islamophobia motion, also previously passed by this council. Hackney has a robust track record fighting racism, and indeed many members of the Labour benches have a personal record on this front. In the Black Lives Matter motion, we promised that we would publish our anti-racism programme of work and ask partners to pledge their commitment. We have committed to publishing an action programme by the end of this calendar year, and we've already secured the backing of our key partners to join up and adopt one anti-racism plan. In the plan, we are clear that being an anti-racist borough is not just about performative activism to increase social and political capital and simply tackling unconscious hatred. Mr. Speaker, I have had many conversations with Councillor Etty and Councillor Fajama Thomas and know their personal track records and the level of seriousness with which they attach to this piece of work. Indeed, as do I. The most damaging aspects of inequality and racism are far more embedded in society and therefore in institutions, and I expect the Council and partners to take a long, hard look at our own structures, culture and leadership. Although the full programme will be published later this year, we are already progressing a great number of commitments. We have developed the guidance and tools for schools to create diverse and anti-racist curriculum. We have heard about the new review of monuments and street names as so that they can celebrate the achievements of Hackney's diverse communities. This work is progressing at pace, and we also continue to celebrate, educate and commemorate the Windrush generation, Windrush history and Black history annually. We are rolling out our approach to inclusive leadership to partners so that we are adopting one approach, and we are working with equality consultants to make our recruitment of group directors as inclusive and diverse as possible. We're also working with the police specifically on inclusive leadership and anti-racism training, and we are close to launching a new accountability group led by Black men for the Young Black Men programme, and our Health and Wellbeing Board is developing its work on health inequalities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Etty, please, we run out of time for your supplementary. So we have now reached the end of the 30 minutes allocated time frame. I would like to thank members who have submitted questions. Those members whose questions were unable to be answered due to insufficient time will receive a written response. We are now moving to agenda item 8, elected mayor statement. Mayor Glanville, would you like to make your statement?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You have up to 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I echo your warm congratulations to Jim Armstrong from the Laburnum Boat Club in your opening remarks. I'd also like to add Robert Hunginger from the Humdingers Bakery Pizzeria in Hoxton Street has also been awarded a British Empire Medal for his work during the coronavirus pandemic. And the Mr. Chowdhury, who was raising funds for coronavirus victims worldwide, whose son runs Yum Yums, was also congratulated with a BEM medal in the latest honours. I'd like to start, Mr. Speaker, though, properly with the cyber attack. And I know that members and residents are anxious about what it means for their security and the services that they rely on. Last Sunday, our ICT team realised that the technical issues that the council were facing was actually a serious cyber attack. They worked quickly to stop that attack and try and protect our systems. I really want to praise them for their vigilance and their efforts and working so hard at the time in the days ahead to keep the council up and running. I think all of us, Mr. Speaker, are incredibly angry that organised criminals have chosen to attack us in this way and in the middle of dealing with a global pandemic. It's put our work and the critical work of our frontline and backroom staff who are keeping our community safe at risk, and I think these actions are morally repugnant. We're working very closely with the government, National Cyber Security Centre, National Crime Agency and other experts to continue to investigate that attack in a cross-agency approach. I want to also thank the Office of Support from our local police, the cross-council and cross-party support that we've had around the attack, and that covers all council political persuasions in London, as well as councillors from the opposition here in Hackney. We're working together to get to the bottom of what has happened. What we know so far is the attack has impacted on our legacy and non-cloud-based systems the most. Different systems that different services rely on for specific purposes and functions, whether that is taking or making payments, logging repairs for our tenants, or approving applications from licensing to planning. Our cloud-based services, like our Google systems, which you're using tonight to communicate, were not as affected, neither was our staff HR and many of our payroll systems. And I'd like to thank all of those at the council who worked hard to make sure that our council staff were paid on time last Thursday. We also made sure that critical systems important to combating coronavirus were up and running, including the contact tracing efforts that Councillor Kennedy talked about. I want to really make clear that our first priority is to be open and transparent with our residents. When we know or learn something new, we will tell our residents as soon as we can. Once we knew the nature of the IT issue last Monday, we told residents first thing on Tuesday. Once it became clear what services were impacted and could not be restarted quickly, we put that information on our website on Friday and also ensured that it could be in Hackney Life going through doors from the start of this week. There are things, though, that we still do not know or are unable to say more on at this point. That's partly because this is an active criminal investigation with national agencies involved who are still making their own assessments. We do not know the motivation behind the attack, nor do we know the full extent of data loss, or indeed if there has been data loss at all. And that goes for our staff, businesses, residents' personal information, and that is why we, of course, reported any risk of a data breach to the Information Commissioner's Office. We sadly do not have a timeline yet for when every service will be back to normal. But tonight, I can promise that no resident or business will face financial penalties because of delays caused by this attack. That means, for example, that anyone who cannot pay a fixed penalty notice because of our systems or faces extra charges being added, or council tenants that cannot pay their rent on time will be penalised. Will not be penalised. Over the coming days and weeks, Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to keep our members and our residents updated on the investigation and wider service impact. Mr. Speaker, it's clear the themes that residents are interested in and their councillors are interested in. I'm going to return to some of them in the rest of my statement. It was clear that the cyber attack could not come at any worse time. We're in the middle of that global pandemic, and as we face that second wave of coronavirus cases in the borough. I'd hoped, Mr. Speaker, that second wave would never come, but here it is. I really do welcome the government's intervention in London, and the Tier 2 restrictions are necessary and will help save lives. COVID has already taken away 233 lives in Hackney. 3 more, sadly, in the past 2 weeks, the first deaths in Hackney since August. It is important that all of us follow the government's guidelines around hands, face and space. Wash your hands, wear a face mask and watch your space. Tier 2 also means not meeting other households inside and only meeting in groups of 6 with people outside, watching social distance at all times. But welcoming restrictions and recognising them as necessary does not stop me from also saying that the government is not doing enough to combat the virus and support people through the pandemic. This week, I told the government that unless they use this time to support businesses, create a comprehensive package of support, financially support struggling councils, and crucially, as Councillor Kennedy has said, improve NHS test and trace, these restrictions and their sacrifices will be for nothing, and another full national lockdown will be unavoidable. I echo the words of Councillor Kennedy. Failure in government has been all too synonymous. Mr. Speaker, for our businesses, Tier 2 is the worst of both worlds. Fewer customers, but forced to stay open, and none of that Tier 3 support that other areas have been offered and have fought so hard for. Businesses in Tier 2 areas need a new package of grants with fewer stringent conditions, which caused thousands of Hackney businesses to fall through the cracks of support the first time around. Last time, hundreds of Hackney businesses with rateable values over 51k missed out because of the government's conditions. Many of them did not get any support at all until we introduced our own discretionary grants scheme later and raised that bracket to 60k. And sadly, I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, the government have made the same mistake again. 51k, a cliff edge for so many businesses in the south of our borough. As Councillor Williams so powerfully said, we also know the impact on employees and those that have already lost their jobs due to this crisis and face coming off furlough. We know that people need real support towards isolating, and although there is payments now in place, it isn't adequate and it doesn't go far enough. Returning to the problem of test and trace, the government needs to stop relying on the old model of privatised and outsourced systems to deliver public services. Even tonight, we're hearing that they're going to deploy more outsourced contractors into test and trace, untrained, when they could be turning to local government instead. They're spending £900 per contract in that £12 billion system and not reaching those that need to be contacted the most. We're spending approximately £2,000 in overtime costs to run our local system. Clearly it will cost more in the long run, but I think there are real efficiencies, and that humanitarian caring response that Councillor Kennedy talked about matters so much. So can I thank all those in the council, the social care system, the voluntary sector, the NHS, our amazing volunteers in mutual aid for leading our local response. There is no back office. We're all on the front line. And our local contact tracing customer service operatives backed by public health are literally saving lives as we move into this next phase. I just very briefly want to touch on what Councillor Woodley and Deputy Mayor Bramble talked about, and that is food poverty and hunger. It is an absolute disgrace as we've been sat here tonight that the motion to extend free school meals has been defeated in the House of Commons by 322 Conservative votes. And I hope that all of us here tonight condemn that, including opposition members. We know that we have to do more to support our local economy, and that is why Councillor Williams and I visited Hackney Community College, part of the new college group, during Love Our Colleges Week. We made a video and we talked to them about how we can improve skills in our borough. We cannot have a coronavirus generation of over 1 million young people in this country unsupported, and we can't have all those workers.
Got a minute left, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Coming to the end of furlough and faced with unemployment, unable to access jobs and skills. That's why we're backing our colleges, why we've written to government, and why we made the video. We cannot wait until next year for the £2 billion National Skills Fund. Our residents need that support right now, and we stand with Hackney College and we stand with B6 in that work. I'm also really pleased, Mr. Speaker, that we'll be going even further than Councillor Williams outlined and developing a new hub at the college on Hoxton Street, bringing together the college, DWP, Job Centre Plus and the council to build on that Kickstarter work and ensure that we really tackle youth unemployment and that skills deficit here in the borough. I'll stop there, Mr. Speaker, and obviously look forward to the opposition party's support for what we're endeavouring to do.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. Councillor Levy, would you like to respond? You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good evening, and firstly, I would like to echo the Mayor's and add our group's condemnation of the cowardly and quite despicable cyber attack on Hackney Council. That is equally an attack on the most vulnerable residents of this borough, who rely to an even greater extent during this pandemic upon the council's critical services for help and assistance. Furthermore, the damaging effects on the council's COVID response and ongoing support for residents is very worrying. At this time, I would also like to pay tribute and offer our thanks to Rob Miller and his outstanding team at ICT, who are providing out-of-the-box and workaround solutions to very complex problems and to maintain services wherever possible. And we trust that all council online services will return to normal in the shortest possible time, but I fear it may be some time before it does. I want to, when I've got the chair, I want to talk about the one-size-fits-all introduction of LTNs in school streets that take no consideration of the adverse impact on neighbourhoods and communities. And during this terrible pandemic, as it ravaged communities up and down the country, the first instinct on everyone's mind during these unprecedented times, Mr. Speaker, is understandably the preservation of life. And as a result, many people are deeply suspicious of public transport, and in exercising their democratic freedoms are preferring, in increasing numbers, to use their motor vehicles where that's available, to help stay safe and to ensure social distancing is maintained. And despite the council's wishes to increase decarbonisation levels, we are learning anecdotally about increased car use, longer journey times, traffic gridlock, and inevitable consequences of slow-moving traffic is a reduction in air quality and the increase of carbon emissions that undermines the health of residents. Mr. Speaker, my own community would be particularly disadvantaged and discriminated against by the introduction of school street closures, It's not uncommon for 3 or more children from the same household to attend different schools, and the only practical method available to parents is the use of school buses to transport the children to the various schools. School buses will now no longer be able to collect grade children during the operational times of school streets, although the schools begin at the same time as schools in the wider community, and appears to me as a breach of protected characteristics under the Equalities Act. The elderly and the infirm will similarly be disadvantaged. The Hutsola Voluntary Emergency First Aid Organisation, that quite literally delivers life-saving services when the area of operation, will be considerably hampered when attending any emergency where time is of the essence and lives endangered because surrounding roads will be inevitably get clogged with displaced traffic. The offer of a route through the appeals process where PCNs are issued will result in a bureaucratic nightmare for this charity runs on the tightest of budgets. Additionally, no blanket exemptions are not proposed for non-emergency situations, and Hutsola, it appears, would be subject to the same restrictions as anyone else. It would be interesting to learn by what authority a call to Hutsola would be deemed to be a non-emergency, as something that at first sight may appear to be minor, may become an extremely life-threatening situation. And how will these incidents be addressed? Will officers at the appeal stage require written diagnostic reports? Well, that would be a clear breach of data information of patient confidentiality. In fact, these proposals are clearly unsafe and unworkable in practice and should be dropped forthwith. Mr. Speaker, the President of the Board of Deputies has taken the unusual step of writing to the Mayor, expressing the community's acute concerns with these proposals and the speed that they are being implemented.
You've got a minute left.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It goes on to urge the Council to engage in proper consultation before the proposals go live to minimise inequalities and other negative impacts. But sadly, I fear this will be disregarded as this administration has great difficulty distinguishing any truth other than its own. Mr. Speaker, there is an important point that I want to make before I finish, and I want to be clear about this. There's nothing about what I've said here should be taken as directed personally at the Mayor or his cabinet. It's axiomatic that from whatever side of the political divide you come, you always consider that you're acting in the best interest of residents. And there will be times, of course, when feelings run high and ultimately you have to agree to disagree. Therefore, I was shocked to learn of and condemn in the strongest possible terms the vile threats made against Councillor Burke and his family. This criminal behaviour has no place in Hackney.
Thank you.
Tolerated by any right-thinking person. Freedom of speech is a privilege of a
Thank you, Councillor Levy. The time is up.
It should never be abused. I hope the culprit is apprehended and brought to justice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Councillor Levy. Thank you. Mayor Glanville, would you like to exercise your right of reply? You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for Councillor Levy's remarks. And I start where he ended in absolutely condemning the threats made to Councillor Burke and also the attacks on the infrastructure that supports these interventions that we're making to improve the quality of our urban environment and, as we've said, rebuild a greener Hackney. All that criminality must be absolutely condemned, and as you say, there are ways of raising these issues. I really welcome the letter, obviously, from the Board of Deputies, and immediately said that I was willing to meet with them and convene that meeting. Sadly, the date in the diary that we were going to meet last week was cancelled at the request of the Board of Deputies, so I haven't been able to host the meeting with them in the way that I had wanted. But that hasn't stopped, I know, council officers, Councillor Burke and others and ward councillors in the area for doing detailed consultation and engagement activities, trying to listen to all of the different stakeholders prior to those schemes possibly being implemented. And I will just say what I've said before, and I know we've got the motion later on. It cannot be acceptable for any part of the borough to not have high quality green infrastructure and efforts implemented to tackle traffic, air pollution and improve the safety of our roads. That is an equalities issue. To exempt and force primary schools of all types in parts of the borough not to have school streets because we can't resolve these issues will be absolutely criminal to the lives of the children that we're trying to protect and improve. We are very sensitive to the issues that you raised. I know a huge amount of effort and engagement has happened with HAPSOLA, and that engagement will continue to hopefully give you and them the reassurance that they need. We should remember that school streets are only closed for an hour each day. They do not permanently alter movements in the area, and we have a track record of ensuring that local residents and key services can access those streets, and that is exactly what we would do when and if we implement those school streets in schools in Stamford Hill. We're also really keen to understand and work with people that are operating those school buses, whether the schools are registered, unregistered, or what other services are being served, and understanding the needs of those children as well. But one of the things that's always been said is that it's a tight-knit community in Stamford Hill that relies on services in that community. And we do have to see modal shift of all of our communities. Because where I also agree with you, Councillor Levy, is we can't go back to a car-based recovery. The Prime Minister has been clear about that. The Transport Department in government has been clear about that. We're absolutely committed to ensuring that the 70% of residents that cannot protect themselves by not using public transport and getting in their car have access to safe and sustainable streets that allow them to walk, cycle, and access the things that they need where they live. It cannot be acceptable that that 30% and outside drivers put at risk that recovery and that greener future that we want to see. And from government, from the Mayor of London, from local councils all across this country, we're making these interventions, and we're actually asked to make these interventions by the Prime Minister. And so while we want to do that with communities listening, and nobody listens more than Councillor Burke and I to some of the criticisms that are made, and we're really keen to make sure that working with officers, we get these projects right, and in their live experimental phase, we tweak them as we have done in Hoxton West, and as we continue to do around turnings and signals as we go forward. And I would just like to finish, Councillor Levy, and say that the government and the Conservative Party believes in what we're doing around school streets. Twice in the last year, we've been visited by the Walking and Cycling Minister, seeing of best practice. And I really hope that the party opposite, virtually or physically, will listen to all of this and really welcome and work with us to deliver these school streets that will benefit every single person in Stamford Hill.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. We will now adjourn the meetings to take a 5-minute comfort break as scheduled in the agenda. Please, can all members turn their cameras and mics off? Can I please request that all members return to the meeting promptly? As we have a full agenda, please note that once the meeting resumes, there will be a roll call to ensure that there's a quorum. Thank you. 5 minutes break. So we're back 8:40. Yeah, 8:40. Thank you.
I camera's on.
Thank you. Is everybody back? We're going to make a start now. Thank you. And we're going to have a roll call, and it's going to be done by Andrew. So please answer to your name.
Councillor Adams.
Present.
Councillor Ajah.
AJ. Adejare.
Adejare. Councillor
Adejare. Not wanted.
Councillor Bell. Councillor Billington.
Councillor Billington, are you here?
Councillor Billington. Councillor Bramble.
Here.
Councillor Bramble.
Present.
Councillor Burke. Present. Councillor Cameron.
Gone.
Councillor Chapman.
Present.
Councillor Charan.
Present.
Councillor Cobham.
Present.
Councillor Conway.
Present.
Councillor David. Councillor David. Councillor Desmond.
Here.
Councillor Etty.
Present.
Councillor Fajara Thomas.
Present.
Councillor Gareza. Councillor Gareza. Councillor Garcia.
Gone.
Mayor Glanville.
Present.
Your office is on mute, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, sorry. Councillor Gordon.
Present.
Councillor Gregory.
Present.
Councillor Hanson.
Present.
Councillor Hayhurst.
Present.
Councillor Joseph.
Just here.
Councillor Kennedy.
Present.
Councillor Levy.
I'm here.
Councillor Lufkin.
Present.
Councillor Lynch. Councillor Maxwell.
Present.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Present.
Councillor McMahon.
Present.
Councillor Moma.
Present.
Councillor Nicholson.
Present.
Councillor Odds.
Gone. It's gone. Yeah.
Councillor August Carnley.
Present.
Councillor Osden. Councillor Osden.
Gone.
Councillor Papier.
Present.
Councillor Patrick.
Present.
Councillor Palace.
Present.
Councillor Peters.
Present.
Councillor Poulier.
Present.
Councillor Potter.
Present.
Councillor Race.
Present.
Councillor Rathbone.
Present.
Councillor Anderson.
Present.
Councillor Ricard.
Present.
Councillor Selman. Councillor Sharman.
Present.
Councillor Smith.
Present.
Councillor Snell.
Present.
Councillor Spence.
Present.
Councillor Steinberger.
Present.
Councillor Stocks.
Present.
Councillor Webb.
Present.
Councillor Williams. Councillor Woodley,
Present.
Councillor Rao.
Present.
Thank you, everybody. The next agenda item 9 has been deferred and will be considered at a future council meeting. Agenda item 10, Audit Committee Annual Report. I invite Councillor Sherman, Chair of the Audit Committee, to introduce this report. You have up to 5 minutes to do so, following which members will have the opportunity to debate the report. Thank you, Councillor Sherman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, as a committee of the Council, the Audit Committee is a key part of our governance system. And over the last year, we've continued on your behalf our essential job of overseeing the Council's performance and its value for money. And of course, the relentless financial pressures we've seen on local government have meant that our services have been under great strain, even before the COVID outbreak. We felt it's therefore vital that we as an audit committee deepen our monitoring of performance and risk. A key initiative has been our deep dive reviews. They're working groups of the committee who've taken evidence from officers about issues where there are significant financial and delivery risks. Last September, we completed our investigation of the resource planning of the underfunded special education needs budget. Our 2 other deep dive reviews in the year have looked at the Council's use of contract workers and its management of in-source services. In both cases, we found contracted labour and outsourced services were being used in line with the Council's policy. However, we did make recommendations for improvements in the performance management of both outsourced and in-source contracts. Our second key initiative has been to reinforce our oversight of service performance and corporate risk. One example is capital spending, which now plays a very substantial role in the Council's budget, including a significant exposure to commercial risk. And we've therefore just launched a new deep dive investigation of the way departments manage their pipeline of capital schemes. Our core oversight role, we have worked very hard during the year to ensure we've got a good, strong controls in place. We review every directorate's risk register in detail, and we comprehensively monitor the Council's overall performance every quarter. We look in detail at the key indicators of each of the Council's core services, and then follow up with local managers where there are performance problems. I'm glad to say our conclusions generally are that we found risk management is well embedded in the Council, though we have found places which still lack consistency in their approach. Just coming on to the COVID pandemic, because that's highlighted some key issues for us. Like the government and most councils across the country, we hadn't identified a pandemic as a key corporate risk. However, I'm delighted to say the Council's departmental risk management systems did, in the event, prove extremely resilient, and as a result, services have generally coped extremely well. From the beginning of the pandemic, we saw our job as providing an overview check of the Council's reaction to the new kinds of demands on our services. We've therefore been having regular updates on service performers over the last 6 months. And I'm also pleased to report we were one of the first Council committees to be back holding virtual meetings in public. And that meant that we were able to reassure Hackney residents and businesses that our services were responding well to the new demands. One of the Audit Committee's core roles is to assess whether the Council is a going concern. Legally, we have to report if we think the Council won't be able to meet its financial commitments. And from the beginning of the outbreak, they've therefore focused attention on the Council's finance and forecasts. I've been delighted that the Cabinet Member for Finance, Councillor Renison, has kept both the Audit Committee and the Scrutiny Commissions very closely involved in this process. Through a special oversight group, we've all been updated on the options and plans the Executive is considering in light of our reduced incomes and rising service demands. From these reports, I'm confident that we'll be able to manage the rest of this financial year and next year as a going concern. At an appropriate time, of course, we will need to review the experience of the outbreak and to learn longer-term lessons from it.
We've got a minute left.
Over the past 2 years, there's been a widespread concern over the shortcomings of private and public sector auditing. Fortunately, in Hackney, our officers have worked well alongside our external auditors, and our annual accounts will be completed by the target. As always, we owe much of the committee's success to an incredibly supportive team of officers, especially in different parts of the finance direct. And we owe a very special debt to our outstanding Director of Finance, Ian Williams, who's given us unstinting support despite the enormous pressures he and his team have faced. Finally, I'd like to thank all my fellow committee members for their enthusiastic support through the year, both in our main meetings and in our deep dive investigations. It's been a real pleasure working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chairman. Would members like to debate the report? You have up to 5 minutes to do so. And I have Deputy Mayor Renningsin. Deputy Mayor Renningsin, go on.
Not so much to debate the report, Mr. Speaker, but at the risk of creating a virtuous circle of thanks, to likewise extend my thanks to Councillor Sharman and his colleagues in Audit Committee for all of the fantastic work they do. And that's really thanks from the entirety of Cabinet as well, because I think, as Councillor Sharman's touched on, the breadth of work delivered by Audit is benefit to us across the Council, and in particular their support and close working on the COVID response and the impact that's had on the Council's finances. And I have to echo Councillor Sharman's thanks to Ian Williams, who I know is here on the call tonight, for the fantastic work of him and his team. So thank you to audit colleagues, and look forward to continuing to work with you over the coming year.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Renningsin. Any other members? Any comment? Thank you. Can we agree to know the content of the report?
Noted.
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. We now move to agenda item 11, Standards Committee Annual Report. I invite Deputy Mayor Bramble, Chair of the Standards Committee, to introduce this report. You have up to 5 minutes to do so, following which members will have the opportunity to debate the report. Deputy Mayor Bramble, thank you.
Thank you. This item, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that I'm Deputy Chair of the Local Government Association, albeit sometimes referred to as the Deputy Leader of the Local Government Association Labour Group. I just want to highlight, if I may, Mr. Speaker, some points about the report. So the Council has a legal duty under the Localism Act of 2011 to promote and maintain high standards of conduct for members and cooperative members in public office. The Standards Committee was established by the Council to help promote and uphold high standards of conduct among members and cooperatives. The report comes to full Council on an annual basis, Mr. Speaker, and the report set out is for 2019 to 2020s. With its memberships and any complaints to standards. A few things that I would highlight is that we reviewed the member of interest form, and I want to thank particularly Councillor Hanson and Lynch on their work on that, because, Mr. Speaker, even for experienced councillors, sometimes it's still quite a minefield to work through what one should and shouldn't put on the form. Also, to grant participation to members regarding declarations to and in relation to the local government pension scheme, to adopt cooperative members to standards committees and welcome again our new appointees and the value that they bring, to review best practice in respect of its membership code of conduct, and to consider the recommendations of the Committee of Standards of Public Life. One of the things, two pieces of work that we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is a task and finish group set up to review the LGA, the local government model of the code of conduct that we're considering and the implications of how to maintain those high standards in public life. I will say, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud that Hackney were doing a lot of the things that the LGA were recommending, and that's a really positive sign, Mr. Speaker. We also, Mr. Speaker, anticipate another report maybe coming back in early January, Mr. Speaker, and that will be alongside the work that we're doing. Mr. Speaker, I'm really pleased to say that there are no standard complaints referred to the Standard Committee for 2019 and 2020, and just want to commend the work of councillors and cooperatives to uphold that standard and hope that that standard of no complaint remains, Mr. Speaker. Would ask members to note the report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. Would members like to debate the report? You will have up to 5 minutes to do so. Any comment? Thank you. Can we agree to note the content of the report?
Agreed. Agreed.
Noted.
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 Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you that are on the Standards Committee.
Thank you. We're now moving on to agenda item 12, Overview and Scrutiny Annual Report. I invite Councillor Gordon to introduce the report. You have up to 5 minutes to do so, following which members will have the opportunity to debate the report. Councillor Gordon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my great pleasure to introduce this report as the Chair of Scrutiny Panel. It's been a very significant year in scrutiny as across the Council, but also a very productive one. In Hackney, we believe that the scrutiny function makes a vital contribution to the work of the Council as a whole and is complementary and equal to that of the Executive. This year, as before, we've continued to develop policy initiatives and also to provide essential and public challenge to the Executive on behalf of the communities we serve. We've continued to innovate in scrutiny, and in response to the COVID-19 crisis, Scrutiny has pressed the Executive to bring the scrutiny function online at the earliest possible stage. Our meetings are now more widely accessible to the community in many ways and have enabled a wider range of contributors, with national figures adding to many brilliant local contributors. As one of the first local authorities to do this, we believe that we have sharpened Hackney's response to the crisis, as well as ensuring our leaders continue to act in a transparent and accountable manner. The 4 commissions this year have given the chance of many voices to be heard of their experience of the pandemic, as well as continuing our longer term forward-looking reviews of council policy. Children or young people continues to challenge the Executive on behalf of our most vulnerable children, whether those excluded from school or receiving social care, as well as contributing to the development of the child family borough. Most memorably, our Youth Parliament members gave voice to the experiences of our young people during the pandemic. Our tenacious colleagues living in Hackney continue to hold the privatised Thames Water to account on behalf of residents who suffered from flood damage. Thames, after being called to the Commission on 5 separate occasions, are finally implementing recommendations. This Commission also continues to shine the spotlight on the complex issues around serious violence, as well as publicly holding the police to account on discriminatory stop and search practices which have broken trust between the police and many members of our community. Health in Hackney continues to provide oversight of all local health and social care services, and throughout the pandemic was on many occasions the first forum to raise public concerns about lack of PPE, outsourcing of staff at Homerton, disproportionality, the impact of the pandemic on our communities, and the test, track and trace service. National experts like Professor Kevin Fenton and Alison Pollock have addressed the Health and Hackney meetings together with our local, brilliant local health leaders. Skills and Economy and Growth continues an ambitious programme of work, continues to bring new and more diverse voices to the council table. Their work on making the local economy work for Hackney, the inclusive economy strategy, and towards a greener, fairer economy will benefit us all in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic and beyond. As ever, this report reflects the contributions of hundreds of individuals, and particularly the scrutiny chairs and vice chairs, Councillors Coburn, Conway, Hayhurst, Billington, Ette, Snell, and for part of the year, Councillor Maxwell, other commission members, the Mayor, the Cabinet, officers, contributors from outside bodies, and very importantly, the members of our local community have given their time to contribute to our meetings and reports. We've also benefited from the scrutiny of the press and frequent reports in the Hackney Citizen, which have brought our work more immediately to a wider audience. I'd also like to thank the brilliant scrutiny officers, Jarlath O'Connor, Martin Bradford, Timothy Upton and Tom Thorne, the brilliant members of our scrutiny team led by Tracy Anderson, who
You have a minute
taken
left.
their work and instrumental in pushing the boundaries of what can be achieved by a local authority.
A minute left.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That's the conclusion of my report. I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Would members like to debate the report? You will have up to 5 minutes to do so. Any comment?
Yes, please.
Mayor Glanville. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Councillor Gordon. I'll be very brief. I've said every time we've seen this annual report presented to Council, I'm really pleased that both it and the audit report tonight is having proper, timely recognition for the work that both functions do. I think we have the finest scrutiny function anywhere in local government, and the fact that we were able to keep it going throughout this crisis, and that it didn't just hold me and the council and council officers to account and the executive, but all of that work with our partners, especially the police, local NHS, and getting those notable national figures to talk about some of the biggest issues of the day in a really timely manner. So in-depth reviews, timely interventions, really on the pulse of what Hackney residents want to see, and so many times in debates, internal and external, I cite the fact no scrutiny is looking at that. And I'm really proud to be able to do that as Mayor. None of us in Cabinet would be where we are today without the scrutiny here at Hackney Council. And I'd also like to say that I think that you cannot have a mayoral and cabinet system without proper, fully invested in scrutiny function, as I always say. And as long as I'm mayor, that will be my commitment to both the borough and all of you that do such incredible work. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sturman. Councillor Snail.
Thank you. I wasn't going to come in, but I just not sure, you know, we take this report each year and I'm not sure people understand just how massive is Hackney Council's commitment to scrutiny. I mean, I hear, you know, Lambeth has one scrutiny committee covering everything, but it was really brought home to me because I was recently elected to the Inner North East London Health Scrutiny Committee with all the other boroughs. And the poor officers have got no support. They're covering a vast area of responsibility. In some boroughs in North East London, there's like one officer covering the whole of scrutiny. And it really is absolutely unique, as far as I can see, this level of scrutiny that we carry out in Hackney. It is fantastic that Phil, as the mayor, is so much behind it. But it is a real tragedy that our Conservative opposition councillors do not engage with it. And it is a real tragedy that more of the public do not follow it and look in. We had this wonderful health scrutiny meeting, which had, you know, the alternative SAGE group that absolutely told us, you know, just concentrate on local.
Thank you, Councillor Snail. Thank you.
Sorry, okay, I'm up to my time. Sorry, thank you.
I see you are in a full flow now, so thank you. Right. Can we agree to know the content of the report, please?
Noted.
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 Thank you. Thank you. We are now moving to agenda item 13, Health and Wellbeing Board Amendment to Terms of Reference. I invite Mayor Glanville, Chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board, to introduce this report. You have up to 5 minutes to do so. Thank you, Mayor Glanville.
Well, there's a delightful surprise, Mr. Speaker. I didn't expect to be doing this. I should have paid, obviously, a lot more attention to the agenda, and apologies to you for that. I noticed it's in Tim's name, but we, as sort of chair, I treat myself as co-chair with with Dr. Mark Ricketts, but also probably really with Councillor Kennedy. We've been revising what we wanted to see the Health and Wellbeing Board focus and do, and bring it front and centre to our response to health inequality in the borough, and ensuring that health and wellbeing is at the heart of all of our policies and everything that we do. So the revisions that we're proposing here tonight allow us to truly do that and make sure that both that terms of reference but also the membership of the board are fully fit for purpose for the task ahead. And it is our commitment that one of that key strands coming out of the pandemic around disproportionality and health inequality is something that firmly sits at our Health and Wellbeing Board. And I would like to pay massive tribute to the work of Dr. Sandra Husbands in really believing in the Health and Wellbeing Board and its front and centre role. It was somewhat withering on the vine as we did all of our health and social care integration work with the Integrated Commissioning Board. But I think what you see in the paper tonight puts it really front and centre of what we want to do and broadens it out for all of the key players, council and otherwise, to play their part in that agenda. I'll stop there given time, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. Does anyone wish to comment on the proposed changes? Anyone wants to comment? No. This item requires a vote from full council. Can members who wish to vote against or abstain identify themselves? Otherwise, I will be taking this as being in agreement to the proposed amendment. Any vote against or abstain? No. So,
Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
This is the first time I'm seeing. This is the first time I'm seeing this report tonight because there was no agendas. I asked to get an agenda 2 weeks ago. Sorry? I can't vote on a blind check. I don't know what's in this report. I haven't seen this report, and it's obviously a very important report.
All
so
right, Councillor.
I'm going to have to abstain because I'm not just voting blindly on the report.
Okay, then. So you're abstaining. That's okay. Anyone else?
Mr. Speaker, I'm neither for, against or abstaining since I only just rejoined the meeting, so it wouldn't be fair for me to participate in the vote.
Okay. Anyone else? Noted. Anyone else? Right. So we agree that apart from Councillor Odds and Councillor Sternberger, we are all in agreement with the proposed change in our amendment. So thank you. I'm moving on to the next agenda. Agenda item 14. 14. Members Allowance Scheme. I will now invite the Chief Executive, Tim Sheets, to introduce the report. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is quite a simple report in that members will be aware that they are required on an annual basis to agree a members' allowances scheme, which they did earlier this year at Council. In addition, there is an annual uplift to the members' allowances scheme, which is in accordance with the uplift that is given to local government officers, which this year is 2.75%. So this is merely agreeing to that percentage uplift to the members' allowances scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Would members like to debate the report? You will have up to 5 minutes to do so. Councillor Sternberger, I can see you put up your hand.
I'm just looking at page 87, 1.1. Could I know exactly when this was agreed with Rodney Brooke?
Chief Executive.
So, Mr. Speaker, what we do regularly is get Sir Rodney Brooke in to review our members' allowances scheme. As people are aware, Sir Rodney carries out a number of these reviews across the country and also reviews the London Council scheme. I think Councillor Sternberger, this was reviewed about 18 months ago, and certainly there were conversations across all party groups around the members' allowances scheme, taking on board representations, and then the member allowances scheme was then amended based on those representations early on in the administration, and then that scheme was subsequently agreed in July 2020, which was voted on at last council.
Thank you. Councillor Odds.
I didn't answer my question. My question was, when was the last time, simple question, when was the last time Sir Rodney Brooks gave that?
I'm sure he has answered the question. Councillor Odds?
Yeah, I'm just going to say what I always say at these particular points. I have no issue with the actual report or whatever. I just find it invidious that the government forces us to vote on our own allowances. It should be nothing to do with the council. It should be totally independent and agreed by an outside body, not by the council. The only input that the council should have should be the fact that it's feasible within the budget. So whatever it is, I think that it's totally invidious for us to have to vote on and I think we should make representations to the government accordingly. And yet again, I will say that it was a stupid decision of the government, even though it was a Conservative government, to exclude councillors from the local government pension scheme, because I think we are losing talent because of it.
Thank you. That will be noted in the minutes. Thank you, Councillor Odds. Anyone else?
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to echo what Councillor Odds, I don't think any of us find it easy looking at this and voting on our own allowances, but to just pick up, and obviously the pension scheme is something that I also agree with Councillor Odds on. I understand it's Labour Party policy at some point to restore that, so I look forward to that at some future day. But just to pick up on Councillor Steinberger's question, I think we only engage Sir Rodney Brooke when we're making material changes to the allowance scheme. So the last time I can recall that happening, as the Chief Executive has suggested, is after the last local elections, when we resolved the issue, I hope to the opposition party's satisfaction around the opposition leader and what would be the second opposition leader's allowances, and the recognition at that time of the harder work that the leader of the opposition would have to do, being the only opposition group. I don't think we have made material changes since then. All we are doing here is applying the same pay rise that we're providing for our staff and as negotiated at a national level with the trade unions in local government. So we wouldn't engage Sir Rodney Brooke to comment on that issue, because that is how allowances are altered. The scheme itself is what we engage with him on.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. Now, any more comments? Thank you. As before, if you wish to vote against or abstain, please indicate yourself now. Councillor Odds?
Yeah, I'm abstaining.
Oh yes, Councillor Odds is abstaining. And anyone else?
Yeah, I'm abstaining. I'm abstaining.
Councillor Steinberger. So I take it the rest, everybody's in agreement with the recommendation. Thank you. Recommendation. Yeah. Thank you. Moving on now to the next agenda item 15. Dispensation report, section 85, Local Government Act 1972, resolution to extend 6 months rules. Before I ask the Chief Executive to introduce this report, I would like to bring it to your attention that members have been asked to extend the 6 months rule to Councillor Rakad, Selman, and not Councillor Joseph, as mentioned in the report. So, Councillor, Chief Executive Tim Shields, can you please introduce the report, please? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, as set out, apologies for the error. Members will be aware that we extended that dispensation to Councillor Joseph in an early report. So the dispensation is for Councillors Rickard and Councillor Selman. I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Would members like to debate the report? You will have up to 5 minutes to do so. Anyone wants? Oh, Mayor Glanville, you want to come in? It's like you are.
I think Deputy Mayor Renson might have wanted to come in.
Deputy Mayor Bramble, I can see a hand.
Bramble, sorry.
Yeah. Shall I? If I may, Mr. Speaker, we as a Labour administration take our equality duties very seriously. And as a Labour administration, we have been at the forefront of working with other councillors up and down the country, Mr. Speaker, to update their maternity, paternity and adoption policies for councillors to ensure that parents, single parents and adoptive parents have the opportunity to have work-life balance as they continue to carry out public life as councillors. We have been one of the first councillors, Mr. Speaker, first councillors in the country to adopt this, and I have been pleased to be a co-chair leader on that piece of work, also supported by my colleague Councillor Williams, whose presence in those discussions, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, has been invaluable. Paternity leave policy gives backbench councillors and cabinet members 6 months of maternity leave and then can be extended to 12 months, Mr. Speaker, as you so mentioned. A member taking maternity leave would have to go to meetings before the 6 months is up. To avoid this, the council must approve dispensation for 6 months for both councillors. This, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you will agree, is out of step and out of touch with what we would say is good for equality and for maternity leave. I know that the opposition councillors raised this at previous meetings, so may I suggest that the opposition councillors, Mr. Speaker, may want to take that up with ministers.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. Councillor Odds.
Yeah, I just want to say I have absolutely no problem with this report whatsoever, and that I agree with Councillor Bramble that equality is extremely important, and the 6 month rule should not apply to pregnant councillors. I'm just rather upset that she's politicising the issue, because I think it's a cross-party issue where we can all agree on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Odds. Any other comment? Councillor Maoma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't be long. I simply wanted to congratulate both Councillor Selman and Councillor Ricard. We'll be sad, I know Councillor Desmond and I will be sad to lose Councillor Ricard for the second time after she's going maternity leave, but I'm just pleased that we are a council where lots of women who are having children are able to be supported in this particular way. And yes, congratulations to both of them. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maoma. Mayor Glanville, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a very similar vein to Councillor Maoma's comments, I ran out of time earlier, but I just wanted to pay massive tribute to the hard work of Councillor Selman, especially as a cabinet colleague. But I know also Councillor Ricard does a huge amount in Hackney Downs and across the council. And just really, I hope take all of council's well wishes to Caroline and Pete as they expect their first child in the coming days. And also welcome Councillor Fajana Thomas to Cabinet as her maternity cover, and obviously note in the report the additional roles for other Cabinet colleagues. But I just thought it was the only opportunity to say that, Mr. Speaker, and I hope I hope we all send those best wishes to Councillor Selman and Ricard.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. Can members agree with the recommendation as set out in the report?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Thank you. We're now moving on to agenda item 17. I will take agenda item 17 before considering the consideration of the motion at agenda item 16A and 16B. So we are taking agenda item 17 first before we go to the motions. Can I ask Chief Executive Tim Shears to introduce the report?
Mr. Speaker, as set out.
Can member agree the appointment of Councillor Fajana Thomas to the licensing committee as detailed in the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Thank you. We are now moving on to. Thank you. We're now moving on to agenda item 16A. Motion to reverse the failed low traffic neighborhoods scheme and consult residents properly. Moved and proposed by Councillor Odds, seconded by Councillor Sternberger. I will now ask Councillor Odds, please propose your motion.
I formally propose the motion.
I will now call on Councillor Steinberger. Please second the motion. Please indicate whether you wish to speak immediately after Councillor Oz has moved and explained the purpose of the motion, or whether you wish to reserve your speech until later period in the debate. Councillor Steinberger.
Okay, I'll tackle the second point first. When you say later on in debate, do I get the same time to talk? How much time do I get to talk?
2 minutes.
It doesn't matter when, before or after.
If you say now, 2 minutes. If you say later, 2 minutes.
Okay,
unless you want a minute.
I will speak.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if it's my computer, but there's terrible feedback. Everything's garbled.
So I would like to please speak later. I'm very proud to be able to second this report on behalf of all residents from all backgrounds in Hackney.
All right, thank you. Councillor Oz, please move and explain the purpose of your motion.
Right. This motion has been brought. I brought this motion in response to the usual Hackney Council ignoring the wishes of residents.
Yeah, Councillor Oz, please, you've only got 5 minutes to do so, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. They're ignoring the wishes of residents, and in order to do this, they are bringing in these so-called low traffic neighbourhoods, which the first effect of these low traffic neighbourhoods is actually to increase the pollution in the borough, because cars are being diverted onto main roads which are already blocked, causing tailbacks, causing massive traffic jams, increasing people's journey times to hospitals and everywhere else. The consultation, if there was any, with LAS and LFB and the Metropolitan Police was at best minimal. There have been emails from the Metropolitan Police that I've seen that have been highly critical of these road closures. And to be quite honest, I can't do better than to repeat what one of my Conservative colleagues in Brent said. He said, we the Conservatives, and I've been speaking to Conservative councils in other boroughs, which I have, see these LTNs as anti-motorist and anti-car. They've been introduced without thinking through the consequences and without any consultation of residents that are affected. We appreciate the need for clean and healthy air, but there are a number of contributory factors to the pollution. One of which is the increase in the traffic on the main roads, and also brought on by the way we now shop online more than in person. That you're consulting while the schemes are trialled is largely irrelevant, as we all know that the council is not duty bound to take the results of any consultation into account. And knowing this council and its contempt for its residents, we fear that this will be the case. These LTNs will not prevent pollution, but will actually increase it on main roads, where there are likely to be more pedestrians. They're causing traffic jams, congestion, and can ultimately lead to road rage. They won't dissuade people from driving, as in many cases there's no alternative. As far as I'm aware, most Conservative-led councils have not introduced these schemes, with the exception of Wandsworth, which quickly backtracked and removed them due to the chaos it was causing. Your school streets, although designed to make things safer for children, could actually increase the danger on the roads, as parents park often irresponsibly to drop off and collect their children elsewhere. We ask that all these schemes be removed until proper consultation and consideration be duly given. These planters that are being put to block the roads, fire engines are heavy goods vehicles. I can't for the life of me seeing a fire engine get through those roads. And when there is a fire, however small, seconds matter. London Ambulance have had many cases where not only have they not been able to get through the route they would normally take, they found another route blocked. And then when they have managed to get their patient and try to transport them to hospital, they have been massively delayed by the extra traffic on the main roads. The police, in their emails, have spoken about the routes that they would normally take to get between major roads in Hackney, where there's massive traffic, which are being blocked off. And they can't get through. They just can't get through. And I would just remind the council that they have already had one court case through blocking roads. Robert De Niro brought a court case, Nobu, led by Robert De Niro, brought a court case which the council admitted it was going to lose and allowed taxi drivers to drive in these so-called non-diesel and petrol car streets. And I fear that if the council persists in its stubborn, anti-car, anti-resident attitudes, they will find that the mass of people who are thronging Facebook and thronging Twitter and thronging outside the town hall a couple of weeks ago and various other places will find the resources to take the council to court. I hope this is not necessary. I hope the council sees sense and withdraws these schemes immediately. Thank you.
The members wish to debate the motion?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, I've got Councillor Bug, Councillor Rickard, Councillor Lufkin, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Stubbs, and Councillor Snail. Councillor Bug, you got 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes. And Councillor Stamberger. Councillor Bug, you got 2 minutes. Go on.
Mr. Speaker, are you satisfied for me to speak without the camera, lest I crash the
Yeah,
whole
that's
meeting?
fine. That's fine.
Okay. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, that prior to the delivery of the new low traffic neighbourhoods, Hackney had the 6th highest air pollution mortality rate of 418 local authorities. Hackney had one of the highest pedestrian and cyclist casualty rates in London. Rat running has doubled in London in the last 10 years due to the use of sat-nav technology. 45% of cars in Hackney are simply passing through the borough without stopping. And children, it is well known in Hackney, were medically assessed as suffering stunted lung development as a result of air pollution. The operation of private motor vehicles in Hackney is a significant factor in these alarming statistics. 40 million more miles were driven in this borough in 2019 than in 2012. 50% of London car journeys are less than 3 kilometres, Mr. Speaker, and 35% are less than 2 kilometres. 50% of private car journeys are for leisure or shopping, not work. The number of cars on the UK's roads has been encouraged by governments of all stripes to double to 40 million in less than 30 years, Mr. Speaker. The social, public health and environmental damage wrought by this situation cannot continue unabated. Low traffic neighbourhoods are one of the best mechanisms for discouraging non-essential car journeys and through traffic. By implementing low traffic neighbourhoods, we're also ensuring that our neighbourhoods do not continue to be a pressure release valve for an overloaded main road network, thereby distributing road space more equitably amongst those who pay for its upkeep in a borough where 70% of households don't own a car. It's extremely important to note, Mr. Speaker, that Hackney's new low traffic neighbourhoods disproportionately favour areas with a larger proportion of council housing, that we fully consult with emergency services on the delivery of all modal filters and have chosen to keep the overwhelming majority of low traffic neighbourhood filters open for the benefit of...
You have a minute left.
The vast majority of people with a registered disability in Hackney use public transport and as their primary source of transportation, and their long-term interests are served by measures that discourage through traffic and eliminating in-borough car journeys. The Conservatives have this evening voiced their concerns about the adverse effects of LTMs on our community. I only wish, Mr. Speaker, that they had expressed the cowls of injustice in the defence of children in this borough who have for decades been poisoned in their beds and their schoolyards by motor vehicles. But, Mr. Speaker, at least they've given the people of Hackney a choice. They oppose low traffic neighbourhoods, they oppose school streets, they oppose controlled parking zones. And if anybody in this borough wants to make themselves less safe on our roads, the air they breathe more polluted, and their children's future must secure, they know where to cast their vote. But I do not believe for one moment, Mr. Speaker, that the people of this borough will do that. Now, I'd like to finally say, Mr. Speaker, that we are continuing to listen to residents. And as in the case of hot and wet low traffic neighbourhood, we'll make amendments where necessary. And it's important that in the fullness of time, low traffic
Buck, time up. Thank you.
Terms. But I am at pains to emphasise, Mr. Speaker, to all in this virtual.
Thank you.
Doing nothing is not an option.
Thank you, Councillor Buck. Councillor Rackard, you got a minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As one of the councillors in Hackney Downs, a key area affected by the recent implementation of the low traffic neighbourhood scheme, it's important for me to say something in response to this motion. One of the reasons I'm in politics is because I believe that in order to build a better future, we have to be prepared to take bold and courageous decisions. This is the case on both climate change and on air pollution. Equally, a core principle for me in politics is that we listen to people and hear what they need to tell us about how local policies affect their lives. Along with Councillor Moema and Councillor Desmond, we've received a large amount of communication on this issue, ranging from residents who are quite split on this, some being supportive, others against and frustrated, and others supporting the principles behind the scheme but concerned about specific consequences. Our ideal is to see a scheme that works for as many residents as possible, and we're particularly mindful of the needs of the disabled and vulnerable, including those who have been unable to use public transport during the pandemic.
Thank you.
As Hackney Down councillors, we will not be supporting the motion tonight, but we would like to encourage the council and the cabinet to listen carefully to Hackney Downs residents, particularly on the impact the scheme is having on specific localised roads and routes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Time up. Thank you, Councillor Rackard. Councillor Lofkin, you've got a minute.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I'd just like to say thanks to Councillor Levy for his strong statement of condemnation about the attacks on Councillor Burke. There's just no place for that in the borough. I would like to say how much I support these measures. I think it's important to remember that Hackney has the highest rate of walking and cycling in London. That has been achieved through in the teeth of opposition of the opposition parties in this borough. We have taken lots of steps over the years to encourage walking and cycling. They have all proved, some of them have proved to be controversial at the time, but very, very, very few people would ever remove the filters that we've put in already. And I think, and it contributes to our success as a walking and cycling borough, and as a borough that takes climate change seriously. Again, I would say in the face of the opposition who continue to deny climate change. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, you've got a minute. Councillor Cameron.
Yes, sorry. Yes, can you hear me? Yeah. I too will be voting against this motion. I'm a councillor for Clissold Ward. Whilst we don't have a new low traffic neighbourhood yet, we've just had a traffic scheme implemented after 3 years of consultation. We listened to our residents and they wanted more intervention. They were concerned about air quality, about adverse impacts and displacement of traffic. And so we're now introducing more measures in Clissold, and hopefully once funding is confirmed, more interventions on Church Street. I suggest that Councillor Odds and Councillor Steinberger should get off social media and get onto their bikes and enjoy the well-publicised health benefits that would accrue. They've opposed low traffic neighbourhoods, school treats, controlled parking, and all sorts of measures in their area. We have absolutely no guarantees that they would participate meaningfully in any further consultations or any plans for other interventions. So I would respectfully submit that they're not in the best position to ask us to take this action.
Thank you.
And I'll be voting against the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Stubbs, 1 minute. Councillor Stubbs.
Your Speaker, I just want to talk about bus users in Hackney. We have the highest proportion of bus users of any London borough, and by extension of any local authority area in the UK. At this time, the bus is vital and is being used by those people who are doing proper jobs keeping this city running. Bus passengers don't make much noise, so we need to make some noise for them and listen a bit less to those with siren voices. The bus is Hackney's most important mover of people. Bus passengers should be our #1 priority as we go into the winter now. The council needs now to focus on the proper functioning of its main road network and take actions to reduce traffic volumes and prioritise bus services. We have to get bus passengers out of this congestion, and we shouldn't be doing things that further worsen the congestion. Please, get those buses moving. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stubbs. Councillor Sternberger, you got 2 minutes. You want to come in now?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would want to start off with actually the guidance of the National Health under COVID, which the best way of going is by car. This is the best way of not catching COVID. And this was advertised in the Evening Standard, so much as some of you just rushing away a full-page ad by the government and NHS together. Now, you all live in denial, so whatever there is, you're always going to say it's never happened, it's not there. The same like the council in Clisselton mentioned, there was three years of consultation. You've done the opposite of what the residents wanted there. The residents didn't want the road closure, so you've done it. And Councillor Lufkin was saying that you've managed to make people walk. Well, actually, it's got to the point where it's so dangerous, you've managed to get the police, the ambulance and fire engines to walk if they want to get to where they're supposed to. And we don't know how many lives have been lost since this has started. We don't know how many ambulances have actually not managed to get to where they had to because of these standstills in Graham Road and Emmis Road. We've actually been in touch with Grant Shapps about this mess up. He's aware of it. And hopefully he will not be giving you a second shift of wasting money again, and he'll be coming down on you, making sure you don't do all this mess up. Now, the worst thing is when you hear the mayor and the cabinet member in charge is speaking, the lack of knowledge in understanding the needs. You've lost a court case already in the CPZ because you didn't do a quality impact assessment. You're still ignoring the needs of the elderly, of the vulnerable, of the young. This reminds me of the story of the fox. The fox went down the river, he saw food, he climbed through the fence, and what happened was he ate all the food, he couldn't come out again because he was too fat. What did he do? The poor fox had to go on a diet. He should be able to walk out the fence. This is what you're doing in Graham Road. You're making the traffic on the standstill, then you're messing around with the pedestrian crossings, pushing it for more green, so people like me who walk sometimes don't have enough time to walk. Stop messing around, get rid of your rubbish, go back.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor Glanville, you have a minute to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to comment on Councillor Steinberger's point, it says very clear in the local COVID alert level high guidance from government, if you need to travel, we encourage you to walk or cycle where possible, or plan ahead and avoid busy times and routes on public transport. It does not say drive in that guidance. Really important. I did not interrupt you, Councillor Steinberger.
Advertising Evening Standard, both from the NHS and from the government.
Order, Councillor Steinberger.
And just to return to the original point I was going to intervene on, both the Prime Minister and the government sent us down the path of encouraging a non-car-led recovery from coronavirus. And it is absolute irony, I think, that they say that all councillors are committed in their motion to having people walk or cycle. Councillor Burt raised the challenge, you had the opportunity, not a single idea has ever come forward from the Conservative Party in this borough to improve air quality or make it easier to walk or cycle. And I think you're just jumping on a political bandwagon for expediency. We're not listening to residents. I say and repeat, we want to be constructive. We want to design schemes that work for people. And I think, Mr. Speaker, tonight we have two contrasting motions. A Tory motion from a group of climate change denying councillors standing up for drivers, all too often from outside this borough, and a Labour motion standing up for Hackney residents impacted by this crisis and 10 years of austerity. That's the contrast, and that's what we're standing on in 2022.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. Councillor Oggs, you've got 2 minutes to reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to correct the omission that I made before and totally agree with Councillor Levy and Councillor Lufkin in totally condemning the absolutely totally out of order attacks on Councillor Burke. I think it can be agreed by everybody here on both sides of the political divide that the one thing we have in common as elected representatives of the people is that our interest is the residents of the borough and the good of the residents of the borough. We were elected to represent everybody, and I hope that's what we do, and I hope that we can all agree that threats of violence and such like are totally out of order. The other thing, of course, that I have in common...
You have a minute left. A minute left.
The other thing that I have in common with Councillor Burke is Beards of the World Unite, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. To go back to the motion, I agree with Councillor Rickard. It's a time to make bold decisions. And the bold decision now is to listen to the people that have overwhelmingly said, we don't want these restrictions, they're causing more harm than good. Councillor Stopp said, get the buses moving. Yes, I agree, get the buses moving. Don't reduce their road space and don't block them with all the traffic and the huge cycle lanes and wider pavements, which are unnecessary. They don't need to be so enormous, the restrictions.
Thank you. Time up now. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Odds. There will now be a roll call, and each of your names will be called in alphabetical order. When your name is called, please turn on your camera and indicate how you wish to vote: for, against, or abstain. So Andrew is going to start calling names now. So please state whether you are for, against, or abstain. Thank you.
Councillor Jar.
Councillor Adejari.
Councillor Bell.
Against.
Councillor Billington.
Councillor Billington. It's not there.
Councillor Bramble.
Against. Sorry, that's Councillor Billington. Against.
Councillor Bramble.
Against.
Councillor Burke.
Against.
Councillor Cameron.
Against.
Councillor Chapman.
Against.
Councillor Cowan. Councillor Chowan.
Shahan.
Councillor Chahan.
Okay, go on.
Councillor Coburn.
Against.
Councillor Conway.
Against.
Councillor David. Councillor Desmond.
Against.
Councillor Etty.
Against.
Councillor Fajana Thomas. Councillor Fajana Thomas.
It's not there.
Councillor Garay.
Against. Sorry, can you get me? Against.
We can, thank you. Mayor Granville.
Against.
Councillor Gordon.
Against.
Councillor Gregory.
Against.
Councillor Hanson.
Against.
Councillor Hayhurst.
Against.
Councillor Joseph.
Not here.
Not here. Councillor Kennedy.
Against.
Councillor Levy.
For.
Councillor Lufkin.
Against.
Councillor Lynch.
She's apologised.
Councillor Maxwell.
Against.
Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor McMahon.
Against.
Councillor Moma.
Against.
Councillor Nicholson.
Against.
Councillor Odds.
For.
Councillor Ogus-Ganley. Councillor Osden. Councillor Papier.
Gone.
Councillor Patrick.
Against.
Councillor Palace.
Against.
Councillor Peters.
Against.
Councillor Pourier.
Against.
Councillor Potter.
Against.
Councillor Race.
Against.
Councillor Rathbone.
Against.
Councillor Renison.
Against.
Councillor Ricard.
Against.
Councillor Sharman.
Against.
Councillor Smith.
Against.
Councillor Snell.
Against.
Councillor Spence.
Against.
Councillor Steinberger.
For stop wasting public money.
Councillor Stopps. Councillor Stopps.
Against.
Councillor Webb.
Against.
Councillor Williams.
Just not here.
Councillor Woodley.
Against.
Councillor Rao.
Against.
Motion's not carried.
Yeah, the motion is now, the motion is not carried. Thank you. I will now move on to agenda item 16B, to end the system of social insecurity. Motion proposed and moved by Councillor Porter, seconded by Councillor Patrick. Councillor Porter, please propose your motion.
I formally propose the motion.
Councillor Patrick, please second the motion. Please indicate whether you wish to speak immediately after Councillor Porter has moved and explained the purpose of the motion, or whether you wish to reserve your speech until later in the debate. So, Councillor Patrick, can you second the motion?
Yes, please. I'd like to second the motion and I'll speak out after Councillor Potter.
Okay. Councillor Porter, please move and explain the purpose of your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since 2011, the government has deliberately eroded the welfare state to the extent that the average family on benefits is almost £3,000 worse off compared to a decade ago. And the consequence of this here in Hackney is that half of all Hackney children live in poverty when you take housing costs into account. The government approach has failed in its stated aim of reducing welfare costs, with people becoming trapped in poverty and the costs passed on to the council, who have stepped up to provide a wide range of support for residents who have been pushed to breaking point. The consequences have impacted disproportionately on residents with disabilities, single parents, and households from Black ethnic groups who are much more likely to live in poverty. During the coronavirus pandemic, the government acknowledged the failing welfare state by making temporary adjustments to benefits, with the council again picking up the pieces to provide a wider range of support to our residents. This motion asks the government to make these temporary benefit measures permanent. It also asks that the government abolishes the benefit cap, abolishes the 2-child limit and the bedroom tax. The government restores the local housing allowance at 50% and restores the universal principle for child benefit. That the government scraps the no recourse to public funds condition and to fully fund and reform universal credit. To aspire to be a more inclusive and equal society, we must address the failings of today's welfare system. Colleagues, On that basis, I ask you to support this motion.
Mr. Speaker, can I move to extend the length of the meeting by a quarter of an hour?
Agreed.
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 Okay. Great. Now the meeting is extended till 10:30. Till 10:15. Sorry, till 10:15. Right. Councillor Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You've got 2 minutes, yeah?
Right, I'd like to agree with everything Councillor Potter says. I just wonder what those returning from fighting from the Second World War would wonder why a Labour councillor would need to pass such a motion today on the system of ending social insecurity and why we are claiming for better benefits. Those who were promised by the Labour government a country fit for heroes and their families and a welfare state so that nobody was ever hungry or vulnerable again or couldn't see a doctor because they couldn't afford one, and the birth of our wonderful NHS, which still survives and has done a wonderful job despite the privatisation from various Tory governments. Would they believe that 70 years later that the Tory government is trying to turn the clock back? We are seeing the slow death of welfare policies. We have massive food poverty in the country and in Hackney.
You have a minute left. A minute left.
Sorry, the Hackney Food Alliance was launched in 2018 because of a rise in food poverty in the borough, and in 2018 saw a 41% increase in food poverty. During the pandemic, we've seen a massive rise in food poverty, not only because of the pandemic, but lots of food poverty has come out of the woodwork where people perhaps didn't want to say they were in poverty before. We've seen the campaign by Marcus Rashford to tackle food poverty amongst children, which got the government to cover food poverty for school children during the holidays. But I note tonight that the government has refused to extend that scheme to for the half term, Christmas and the next half term, saying that they're doing enough already for the benefit system for poor families and children. We all know it's not only children that suffer, it's parents as well.
Time up,
who
thank you.
may give up food for their children.
Thank you.
Support the motion, please.
Thank you. Do members wish to debate the motion? I've got Councillor Renningson, and Councillor Desmond, and Councillor Etty. So, Deputy Mayor Renningson.
Councillor Odds is quite keen to come in, Mr. Speaker, if that needs to be before my contribution.
Okay. Councillor Odds, I can't see. I didn't see his hand up.
I just wanted to say I would also like to debate the motion. So.
Okay. All right then.
On the list.
All right, on the list, Councillor Odds. All right, thanks.
In that case, I'll proceed, Mr. Speaker. Just wanted to thank Councillors Potter and Patrick for bringing forward such an important motion. Within the housing needs portfolio, I see the heartbreaking reality of the inadequacy of the welfare state on a daily basis. It's been cut to near Victorian levels. I'll be brief and I'll just touch on two of the most draconian measures. We've got the benefit cap. So we've seen local housing allowance increase in response to the pandemic, and yet we've seen the benefit cap left in place, literally given with one hand, taken with another to those families that need this support. And the fact that the government chooses to retain the no recourse to public funds condition, not only retain it, but choose to remind us of the legal status of those with no recourse to public funds at a time of a global pandemic where we need to help everyone that needs it. Support should be based on need, and it's hard to conceive of the notion of anything that merits the term welfare state without that. I fully support this motion, and I'll continue to do everything I can to press the government to invest in rather than cut our welfare state.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Renningson. Councillor Desmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a most important motion. You know, a safety net, inevitably being a net, has holes, but under this Tory government, the holes are bigger than the net. It's wholly inappropriate that this should be what happens in 21st century Britain. I deal with a lot of tenants on universal credit. You'd need to have a Master of Science in order to go through the labyrinthian processes to actually get payment. And one of the sad things is, during the pandemic, people who have never claimed welfare in their lives find, due to technicalities, they're not eligible for payment. And that's grossly improper. And then there's the benefits cap, particularly in places like Stamford Hill, where traditionally people have large families. It's particularly unfavourable there. And that's what Councillor Odds and Councillor Steinberger should remark upon. We need to try to bring that net so the holes are actually much smaller and we help those in the greatest need in the borough. I very much support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Desmond. Councillor Etty.
Yes, 1 minute. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleagues for bringing this to the motion. It's really pathetic. I mean, based on what my colleague have said. I was once in this position and I sincerely understand what it takes. And I have some, not residents, even friends, who are in so much difficulty as we speak, unable to feed their children, unable to feed their families. I know how many people I have supported financially. And it's great for us to bring this motion and add that access to benefits should be based on needs. We really need to put an end to this, and welfare state court honestly has been cut to barest level. I support the motion and I encourage all colleagues to support the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Etty. Councillor Odds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all,
1 minute.
Yes, 1 minute, Mr. Speaker. I will be as brief as I can. First of all, Councillor Patrick, when my father returned from when my father came to this country from the First World War, having fought at Monte Cassino amongst other places, he would not, if he was now, recognise this country. The improvement, I'm not saying anything's perfect, the improvement in the conditions that people have these days. I am going to oppose this motion for the simple reason that it doesn't address both sides. It's a Gordon Brown motion. Spend, 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 and ignore the consequences. I agree that there are things that need to be changed. I agree that poverty is unacceptable, that we have to do whatever we can to support people. But there has to be the other side of it. That support has to be paid for somehow, and proposals have to be brought forward.
Thank you.
To improve that. I oppose this motion for that reason.
Thank you, Councillor Odds. Councillor Porter, do you want to exercise your right to reply? 2 minutes.
I would just like to thank my colleagues for the supportive comments that they've made in talking about talking about the importance of the welfare system becoming more about need. And I disagree with the comments that Councillor Odds made on this motion is not asking for spend. It's about changing the welfare system so it meets need and enables us all to live in a much fairer and inclusive society. So I urge my colleagues to support the motion, and I thank everyone for supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Just for the record, this is not a recorded vote. So we're now moving to a roll call, and each of your names will be called in alphabetical order. When your name is called, please turn on your camera and indicate how you wish to vote: for, against, or abstain. Thank you.
Councillor Bell.
In favour.
Councillor Billington.
In favour.
Councillor Bramble.
For.
Councillor Burke. Councillor Burke.
He's gone.
Councillor Cameron. For. Councillor Chapman.
For.
Sorry, for.
For. Councillor Chauhan. Councillor Cobham. Councillor Conway.
For. Sorry.
Councillor David,
4.
Councillor Desmond,
4.
Councillor Etty,
4.
Councillor Fajana Thomas,
4.
Councillor Garaiza, Garcia,
Just not there.
Mayor Glanville,
4.
Councillor Gordon,
4.
Councillor Gregory,
4.
Councillor Hanson,
4.
Councillor Hayhurst, Councillor Hayhurst,
It's not there.
Councillor Kennedy,
4.
Councillor Levy, Councillor Levy,
Gone.
Councillor Lufkin,
4.
Councillor Maxwell,
4.
Councillor Mackenzie,
4.
Councillor McMahon,
4.
Councillor Moma, Councillor Moma,
Gone.
Councillor Nicholson, Councillor Odds,
4.
Against.
thank you, Councillor August Scanley,
It's not there.
4.
What's that?
Councillor Ozen,
4.
Councillor Papier,
Gone.
Councillor Patrick,
4.
Councillor Palace,
4.
Councillor Peters,
4.
Councillor Poulier,
4.
Councillor Potter,
4.
Councillor Race,
4.
Councillor Rathbone, Councillor Rathbone,
4.
4.
Councillor Renison,
4.
Councillor Ricard,
4.
Councillor Sharman,
4.
Councillor Smith,
4.
Councillor Snell,
4.
Councillor Spence,
4.
Councillor Steinberger, Councillor Steinberger,
He's gone.
Councillor Stotts,
4.
Councillor Webb,
4.
Councillor Woodley,
4.
Councillor Rao.
Yeah,
4.
Councillor Mahoma. Oh.
Councillor Moma 4. Apologies, Chair.
That's it. Motion's carried.
Yes, I declare the motion carried. Thank you.
Hooray.
That concludes the formal business of this evening. And can I thank everyone for attending and for their contribution. And I invite you to a virtual drink. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Are you paying?
That's almost
Virtual.
Councillor Odd abstained.
Thank you.
Abstained.
Everybody have a nice evening. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Congratulations. Bye-bye.
I think you're ready. Don't worry.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'll take one for you.
All right, thank you. Bye.
After the 10 p.m. curfew.
All right, thanks.